All right, good morning, everyone. Let's start the meeting. It's 9:10. We delayed a little bit so that some of the latecomers could arrive. We understand there was some confusion about the highways. One of the exits being shut down. My name is Dan McKiernan. I'm the director, and I really want to thank all of you for taking an interest in this topic and coming today. And in addition, I think we have 65 people online as well. It's really it's a credit to all the preparation that Derek and Tracy and the team have put together. So thank you for all of you for coming. We, as an agency, we spend a lot of resources on horseshoe crabs. I think there's 11 DMF people in the room today. So, you know, this is a challenging one for a lot of us, but we're still at it, and we're doing the best we can. I want to give the long distance award to Jen Lander from the state of New York, who's back again, and she's going to be presenting. And she came last year with an entourage from New York, and I know they really appreciated the insights that they picked up today. And I also want to thank all the folks in the citizen science realm who contribute to the spawning beach surveys and for the interest that they take in this. And so thank you all. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to the moderator, Tracy Pugh, who is the head of our invertebrate fisheries program. Do I have that right? That's good. Anyway, she's also sort of the lead lobster biologist by trade, but she oversees the project on all the invertebrate fisheries. So take it away, Tracy, and thanks again, everybody, for coming.
All right. Hi, folks. Again, thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. And I am just going to briefly introduce my team so that you know who folks are. And then, like Dan said, there's a number of other DMF staffers here. So my name is Tracy. I'm the head of the program. Our program works collectively on lobsters, horseshoe crabs, whelk, donut crabs, and northern shrimp, with some occasional work on things like blue crabs or maybe sea cucumbers, things like that. So there's 5 of us total. So Derek Perry and Laura Tomlinson, who you'll be hearing from both of them today. And we're also getting some assistance today from Jake Dorothy, and he will be bringing a microphone around. So during the question and answer session, if you have a question, please wait for Jake to bring you the microphone so that the folks online can hear. And then Jillian is moderating our online folks. And folks online, if you have a question, please put it in the chat, and we will either unmute or read out the question from the chat. We'll see how that goes. Yeah, okay. Yep.
Tracy, I forgot to mention that there's microphones all through this room.
That's on the list.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So be careful
Yeah.
about your side conversation.
Yeah.
They're going to be recorded.
Yeah, so this meeting is being recorded, and like Dan said, there are microphones all over the room. So please keep sidebar conversations to a minimum so that the folks online don't have a bunch of noise in the background. And be aware that you're being recorded. Some housekeeping, there are bathrooms. If you go out the door, hang a right, and then go this way down the hallway, the bathrooms will be down there on your right. There's also a water fountain down there. There are vending machines if you get desperate in the little kitchen over there. So we are here today to have a science meeting and talk about data and information so that we can share that with all of you folks. This is not a public comment meeting, and we're not really going to touch on policy here today. So we want to keep it very science focused, very sharing of information, asking questions of the information that we're sharing and that our guest speakers are sharing with you. And let's see if I got all of my stuff. Folks online, if you could please remember to mute yourselves so that we in the room don't get background noise from the folks online. We would appreciate that. All right, so today's agenda, you're looking at 9 a.m., 9:10, that's me. We're going to start with Derek and Laura reviewing Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries information and data. Then we're going to go to Jen Lander with New York DEC. We'll take a brief break, and then we are going to hear from Liana D'Annunzio from Manamit on some shorebird research that she's conducting. And then we'll have a brief wrap up, and hopefully we will all get out of here in time for lunch before we start. So I do want to briefly read out our mission statement. So DMF does have an official mission statement, vision, and goals. Our mission is to manage the Commonwealth's living marine resources in balance with the environment resulting in sustainable fisheries and contributions to our economy, stable availability of diverse, healthy seafood, and enriched opportunities that support our coastal culture. The vision of the agency is to achieve sustainable fisheries and healthy marine ecosystems through sound science, innovation, collaboration, effective leadership, and stewardship, all serving to enrich the productivity and socioeconomic value of marine fisheries to the Commonwealth. And our goals are to advance the understanding and stewardship of our living marine resources, including fish, habitat, and marine protected species, and to support sustainable commercial and recreational fisheries. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Derek to start up with the DMF data presentations. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. So, it's a little bit about me first, so you can see where I'm coming from. I'm a senior biologist here at DMF. I work with horseshoe crabs, journal crabs, blue crabs. Been here for 23 years. My 13th year coming up now for working with horseshoe crabs. When I first started with horseshoe crabs, it's about a quarter to a third of my job. Now it's the vast majority of my job. Not only that, it's also the majority of Laura's job. We're hiring 2 people this year to work on the studies we're doing this year. So we're going to have 4 people primarily working horseshoe crabs this year. So it's a lot of work we're doing here. My job in a nutshell is to provide scientific advice to managers and the public. I do that through the data. So you're going to see what the advice is based on today, which is the data that we collect. I'm also a member of the ASMFC Horseshoe Crab Technical Committee. ASMFC is a regional agency which manages horseshoe crabs at the interstate level. My job there for the technical committee is to provide scientific advice as part of a team member. I'm also on the stock assessment committee. So for that, I work with other state and federal horseshoe crab biologists, as well as academic biologists, statisticians to evaluate data sets up and down the coast. So we go over 2 different data sets, fisheries within data sets. There's a bait fishery and a biomedical fishery. The bait fishery uses crabs to catch channel whelk, which is the species right there. There's also a biomedical fishery, which bleeds horseshoe crabs and then releases them back into the ocean. The blood from horseshoe crabs is used to make a product that's used to test for certain types of bacteria and fungal infections. So this is the timeline of some of our regulations. Fisheries management for horseshoe crabs in the state started in 2000. At that point in time, the fisheries management plan up and down the coast said take a 25% cut whenever you're harvesting at that point in time. So ASMFC said, okay, 25% cut, your quota is 330,000 crabs. So that's what we started off with in 2000. That was based on declining trends is the reason that was put into place. In 2008, the trawl set was still showing declines. So the quota was cut to 165. Also at that point in time, we didn't think that 330 was actually accurate as far as how many crabs were harvested in the past, because we weren't coming remotely close to it. In 2010, the May-June lunar closures went into place. At that point in time, there seems to be an inflection point. So you look through our data from that point on, usually around 2010, you see increase in abundance in most of our surveys. So remember that date. But at that point in time, we're still seeing a declining trend in our surveys. In 2013, the lunar closure was extended to mid-April because we had a really warm season in 2012. So that was extended again. In 2023, due to the addition of a second biomedical firm, we wanted to keep mortality at the same level. So we reduced the bait quota and started the biomedical quota. So that's the first one's been done in the country as far as setting a set biomedical quota. And then just in 2024, the April 15th through June 7th closure, we haven't really seen the results of that yet. We're expecting to see more results from that in about 10 years. Those crabs that were laying eggs at that point in time, and those juveniles become adults, we're expecting to see them back on the beaches in about 8 years from now. So they mature around 9 to 11. So we're expecting to see those crabs on the beaches in a few more years. For biomedical regulations, there's a number of them. Bled crabs must be marked to avoid rebleeding. You can see this mark here on this crab. This cursor works. So there's a mark on the underside of the crab. That indicates that crab has already been bled. That crab cannot be bled the same year. So we go through different shapes. There's 4. There's a line, horizontal, vertical, a V, and a plus sign. We rotate through those four shapes. Each biomedical firm has their own color. So that way we can tell if there was ever a mortality event, we can trace it back to one company or the other. The crabs have to be kept moist. Containers can be no more than 2/3 full. Crabs can be separated by source. They go back to where they came from. They have to be transported between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit in their trucks. Lab temps can be no more than 70 degrees. There's a maximum of 36 hours out of the water. The crabs can be released to the water body where they came from. Biomet trawlers must keep the crabs in containers with running seawater, either in a tank or just with a hose running over them. And biomet processes contain crabs from biomet dealers, bait dealers through the rent-a-crab program, or other states. So the rent-a-crab program, what is it? The program advocated for by DMF. Horseshoe crabs are caught under the authority of a bait permit, and once an LAL manufactured and bled, they're returned to the bait dealer to be sold as bait. So they're counted against the bait quota. This makes the crabs more valuable because they're sold for two purposes. And nothing stops anyone from using a bait crab for other purposes. You could bleed it, you could eat it if you really want to. No one really does here, but you could. This is not unique to Massachusetts. You can get crabs from other states and still bleed them from, say, Delaware or something like that. But what is unique is that we advocate for this program. The reason we do that is because we consider it a conservation measure. It reduces the number of crabs that need to be harvested for LAL and kind of operates like an organ donor program. The crabs we use for bait are going to die. So these crabs, we take the blood from them first, and then they get put back to the bait market. It's also a more efficient use of a resource. You kind of think of like a Native Americans in all parts of buffalo. Similar type thing. It also reduces concern for sublethal effects during the spawning season, which is now illegal anyway. But prior to that, prior to the 2024 regulation, you could bleed crabs during the spawning season outside the lunar enclosures. But because the rent-a-crab program, most of the time they're taking crabs from that bait stream first, or the biomedical crabs, so reduce the impact on the other crabs that were being bled. So largely negated the sublethal effects on crabs stressed during the spawning season. So two data sets for commercial harvest data, harvested data itself from the fishermen, and then dealer data. Harvested reports come from mass trip over reports or NOAA vessel trip reports. They're usually not available to me until later in the year after they go through QA/QC. They provide data on landings by species, location of catch, date of catch, fishing method, either by hand or by trawl, fishing effort information such as tow length, how the dealer catch was sold to, etc. For dealer data, we get that through safest dealer reports. It's available in close to real time, so we use it to monitor the quota and track it over time. That provides data on harvester information, the current, landings in pounds or count, as well as landings value, how much the crabs are sold for. Also the port where they're landed. When I'm talking about landed, I'm talking the crabs that are brought in to be sold. So starting with the data, for biomedical harvest, we were close to the 200,000 crab quota in 2025, but did not reach it. For bait, dealers reported buying 137,000 crabs. 2024, harvesters reported selling 135,000 crabs. Method of harvest was 92% by mobile gear and 8% by hand. This is a bit of a change from the past due to the 2024 regulation, shifting the fishery from hand to mobile gear based on that closure during the spawning season. This is a catch over time. The y-axis here is the number of crabs harvested. You can see in 2006, about 140,000 crabs. At that point in time, our quota was 330,000 crabs. In 2008, 165,000 crab quota went in. We're still mostly below that. In 2023, the new quota went in, 140,000 crabs. We've been right around that mark ever since. This graph shows cumulative percentage of crabs landed. When the lines are very flat, that means how many crabs are coming in. Then you get to the top. So you consider this the quota here, 140,000 crabs. It's 100% of the quota. So what you see here is accumulation over time of all those crabs. You see a flat area here. That's during the spawning closure now, from April 15th through June 7th. So that's why you see a flat line there, because there's no crabs coming in. Then it steepens up here where the crabs are coming in during the summer and early fall. This is looking at the 2024 landings, regulation changed landings. This is looking at location of catch. From 2019 to 2023, about 9% Cape Cod Bay, 2% from Buzzards Bay, 3% from Vineyard Sound. There's nothing north of Cape Cod Bay that's usually ever caught. 85% from the Nantucket Sound. It's always been the main part where most of the crabs have come from. But with the regulation change, it's even more condensed in that area. So basically all the harvest is coming from Nantucket Sound, a little bit from Vineyard Sound. There's not much coming from Cape Cod Bay anymore, and not much from Buzzards Bay at all. 2024, I think one guy fishing Buzzards Bay, that was it. So you can really see how it's really shifted to the Nantucket Sound. So that's a space we really need to monitor with our surveys in the Nantucket Sound. Look at the impacts of the fishery. This is looking at gear type, how the crabs came in based on gear type, either mobile gear or hand. The dashed line is mobile gear. So it has increased over time, where hand harvest, which used to be around 90% in 2007, is down to below 10%. That's a product of that regulation change in 2024. So looking at bait permits over time, there's been a decrease in the number of issued permits. These are the ones that are issued. This one here is the ones that actually are fished, so people actually use those permits to catch crabs. You see a lot of latent effort where people aren't actually using the permits. But there's been declines in both of these over time. Number of issued permits is down by 33% since 2008, about a 75 decrease since 2014 number of active permits. For biomedical, it had been fairly stable until we had a second biomedical firm come in 2022. That's where you see this big jump here, but it's come down a little bit since then. Let's look at the landings value over time. 2006 is about $300,000 rather. But now we're over $1.1 million. You can see how the second biomedical firm in 2022 has increased the price for the fishermen. This is looking at coastwide mortality. This is Florida to Massachusetts. Basically, you see the blue line there, bait mortality going down slightly, but pretty jagged. This line here is the total biomedical mortality. It's risen since COVID, basically. It was fairly stable. It's increased a little bit lately. You can see overall mortality there in black. Now going onto our fishery sampling. This is when DMF biologists are out in boats collecting data from the commercial fishery. For biomedical sampling, it's increased since 2022. So basically, in 2022, the second biomedical firm opened up in the state. At that point in time, a lot of conservation groups saying, hey, we're really concerned with the impact of that second firm. We'd like to do more sampling. At the same time, the biomedical firms came to us and said, hey, we're concerned with the misinformation being spread about us. Can you please come out more often? So we go out more often because everyone wants us out there, so we do it. For sampling trips, we sample various stages. There's a collection stage here. This is when the guys are catching crabs either on a dragger or by hand. So we're on those boats when they're doing that. They're either then transported to our facility or put in in-water holding. The in-water holding, we sample that as well. From there, they go to the labs. We're sampling the labs. And then in the labs, either blood's collected or they're rejected for bleeding. They're put in holding. We're there when it's being done, but we're actually not sampling them then, but we're in the building at the same time. We're also on the boats when being transported to sea and released. We're on the boats watching how many crabs are being released alive or dead. ASMFC requires mortality to be reported. That can be done in two different ways, either through biomedical reports from the biomedical firms themselves or from samples collected by biologists. We do both in this state. For market sampling, that's the bait market sampling. We also do that as well. We're going to bait markets, guys that are selling crabs, and measure the crabs there. We'll also go to measure crabs in the rent crabs program at biomedical facilities. So at sea sampling, this started in 2022. This is when we're on the boats while the guys are catching crabs for biomedical purposes. Program expanded in 2023. The focus of this is on discarded crabs. This is the only time we'll see the discarded crabs. We'll see the crabs that are kept in other stages of the process. This is the only time we'll see the discarded crabs because we let them go while they're at sea. We do collect information on some of the kept crabs, but just a subsample. So what we're doing when we're out there, we're collecting data on size, sex, maturity, injury status, anything dead, and also looking at recaptures. You can see this mark down here. This is a mark that was done in 2022, was recaptured in 2023 and still bore the mark. So we're looking for that too, look for recapture rates. We're also measuring the crabs out there as well. So this is the data from that 2025 summary. We sampled from July to November. There are fewer biomedical trips in June due to the rent crab program and the closure, so we can't get that first week because it's closed anyway. So it's often more difficult to get trips in June. We did 6 sampling trips in 2025, sampling 3 different boats, and 5 different biologists participated. You see a summary over the time series from starting in 2022. We have yet to see a dead crab on any of these trips. The discard marks have been a little bit variable, which we're not really sure why it's like that. We looked at things like timing, proximity to the release points. Don't really see a trend yet, so we're a little confused why it's a little bit variable. But basically, we're sampling tons of animals, nearly 6,000. We haven't seen a dead crab yet at that stage. Looking at pen sampling, that started in 2023. Data collected includes time in pens, counts of crabs by sex, mortalities by sex. We also collect environmental data. So if there ever was a mortality event, we could trace it back to a reason, possibly, such as dissolved oxygen, salinity, or temperature. So summarizing the 2025 data, we sampled from June 25th through October 28th, collected 9 sampling trips at 4 different locations, and 4 different scientists participated. See, over time, there's been fairly low mortality. We had 14 trips in 2023, So a total of 10 dead crabs, only 2 in 2024, and only 1 in 2025. Overall, mortality rate has been 0.2 out of a sample of nearly 6,000. So far, there's no significant correlations with the environmental data yet. We are seeing a trend. If you hold the crabs longer, say 4 days, there is a tendency to see more crabs that pass. So basically 12% of our trips have occurred when the crab's been kept for 4 days or more. 80% of mortality is seen in those 12% of trips. So there's something going on there, but it's not significant yet in terms of statistics. Starting 2000, we started biomedical sampling, but harvest location was not reported until 2008, as well as type of harvest. So what that means is we didn't know, it wasn't recorded if it was bait or biomedical, wasn't recorded if it was Nantucket Sound crabs, Cape Cod Bay crabs, or Nantucket Sound crabs. So we can't really use that data because it's known that crabs differ by size, by area. So we only use the data from 2008 on because we know where they came from. You can compare apples to apples. Data collected includes biological data, size, sex, collect injury status, mortality status as well. This is the number of samples we've collected over time, starting in 2009. You see a big increase here, especially once that second biomedical curve opened up. This is a product of the number of trips we're taking. So this is effort for our samplers, not necessarily the number of crabs landed, but this is the effort we're putting into the crabs to sample more and more. We're seeing an increase in both those sample sizes. So this is a summary since 2019. Number of trips, you can see it increased pretty much in 2022, decent amount. And we're sampling a lot of crabs here and seeing pretty low mortality rates. We weren't seeing any mortality prior to 2021. We started collecting that data because we started seeing some dead crabs in the bait stream. So we started doing the biomedical stream too. First few years, we didn't see any. Starting in 2023, or actually 2022, we saw 1. In 2023, we saw an increase in mortality. That came back down in 2025. Over the last few years, we're seeing a 0.2% mortality rate of a sample size of over 13,000 crabs. So pre-bleeding mortality, to summarize that part. For capture, we're not seeing any dead crabs for males or females. For pens, we're seeing 0.2 for both sexes. In the lab, we're seeing 0.2 for males and 0.4 for females. For total pre-bleeding mortality of 0.4 for males and 0.6 for females. The pre-bleeding mortality estimate is based on almost 20,000 crabs from captured pen and lab sampling combined. Includes 2023 and 2024, which had higher mortality rates than other years. We only saw 1 mortality from 2019 to 2022, but 27 from 2023 and 2024. 2025 went back down only 2. Now looking at release sampling. That started in 2022, increased sampling in 2023. Data collected includes for blood crabs, number alive and dead. For crabs rejected by the biomedical firms, we also count the number of crabs alive and dead. So if a crab's too small, if it's injured, if it's bleeding or anything else, the biomedical firms were rejected for bleeding. Just like when you go to donate blood, if you're not healthy, you get rejected. Same thing with these guys. So we also want the crabs that are rejected as well to see if they have different mortality rates. So for that, we sent from June 25th to November 19th. We did 13 sampling trips, 5 different release vessels, 6 different biologists participated in 2025. See the last 3 years here, number of crabs is almost 3,000. We've seen 20 dead males and 40 dead females. So less than 1% mortality rate at the point of release from our samples. This is unique for fisheries that we work with. Most of the fisheries we work with have 100% mortality. So they don't get released back in the water. So say a lobster, if the lobster's landed, it's going on someone's plate. This fishery is unique because 99% of the crabs go back in the water alive. So this estimate is based on over 7,000 crabs. We're not seeing any mortality from the rejected crabs to this point in time. The market sampling that started in 2000 for bait. Again, same thing as the biomedical harvest. Wasn't recorded until 2008 for location or bait or biomedical stream. Data collected includes biological data like size, sex, injury status, things like that. Sampling intensity has varied. It was rarely sampled outside the spawning season prior to 2014. It was only during May and June at that point in time for the most part. But since 2014, we've sampled across the board. If crabs are coming in, we sample. Just looking at the number of samples collected over time. See an increase here, just like the biomedical portion. This is the bait stream. So this is the number of crabs we're sampling per year. So to summarize all the sampling for the biomedical and bait horseshoe crabs, we had 48 trips last year, sampling nearly 13,000 crabs. So it's a tremendous amount of work. 10 biologists participated in 2025. It's the 3rd most sampled fishery we have in the state behind only lobster and groundfish. This fishery is not one of our bigger fisheries. It's usually around 28th or 30th. We're sampling it a lot because of the interest from the public. So far, we've sampled over 30,000 crabs in the last 3 years, so it's quite a bit of effort. So data fishery summary, active permits in fish permits are decreasing over time. 98% of the day quota is caught in 2025. The 2024 regulation change shifted the fishery. We have barely any harvest in Cape Cod Bay or Buzzards Bay now. Nearly all harvest is from Nantucket Sound. 90% of the harvest is by mobile gear now. It's now very hard for hand harvesters to find crabs because they don't have access to them during the spawning season. Look at the biomedical fishery. Active and fish permits have increased since the second biomedical permit opened up in 2022. The biomedical quota was close to fill in 2025. DMF is putting tremendous effort into monitoring the biomedical fishery. There's 41 trips for biomedical alone last year. Pre-bleeding mortality has been around 0.5 the last 3 years. And post-release mortality has been around 1% over the last 3 years. So now I'm going to go into the fishery independent surveys. These are the surveys we use to monitor the population. We have our spawning survey, which Laura will talk about in a second. This is a volunteer-based survey. Then we have the mass DMF trawl survey in the middle. This is a survey done on a NOAA vessel. We drag a large net behind the boat, catch crabs all up and down the state. The DMF seine survey, which is done in coastal embayments south of Cape Cod. These are all relative abundance surveys. What that means is it's used to track abundance over time, but it's the data points are relative to the rest of the data sets. So basically, if you have a data point, you're starting a new survey with data point 0.3, that one data point doesn't mean anything. It's a long time series that gives a context compared to other points in the time series. So survey observations are proportional to the population. If the population increases, the survey index should go up proportionally. If it decreases the population, the index should go down proportionally. If the population is stable, the index should be stable as well. A time series is needed for context. The longer the time series, the more context is provided. So the DMF trawl survey has been around for 48 years, seine survey for 50, spawning survey for 17 years. That's pretty good context there. So we can track abundance over time through decades. So Laura's going to do this section here. Laura took over this portion of the survey this past year. She's been doing a great job with it. I warned her in the beginning of the year that after putting out a social media post, you usually get a lot of hits from people. So I usually got like 50. Her first day, she got 500. So there's been a lot of interest, and she's been dealing that with very, very well, getting back to all those people. It's been greatly appreciated. So I'm going to pass it to Laura.
So yes, my name is Laura. I took over sort of coordinating and overseeing the data for the survey last year. So this is my first time presenting this data to this group. So bear with me if I stumble a little bit. Just to give you a brief overview on the survey, it is volunteer-based, and we rely very, very heavily not only on volunteer effort to conduct these surveys, but also on outside volunteer organizations to organize and coordinate and staff these surveys, as well as making sure volunteers are trained to do these surveys safely and properly. Surveys take place in May and June, 2 days before, the day of, and 2 days after the new and full moons, either during the day and night high tides or just during the day high tides, depending on the location of the site. Like Derek mentioned, this is a relative abundance series, which means we have fixed stations and the data for each site is compared to itself. Currently, we survey 16 sites across the state, with the northernmost one in Plymouth Duxbury, and they've kind of wrapped all around the Cape and are in the islands, and we have one in Buzzards Bay as well. It's estimate 16 sites because we have had some sites added and lost over the years. For example, we used to survey Morris Island in Chatham, but that beach completely eroded away, and we unfortunately lost that time series. And that's just the beach is no longer there. So we have a recent beach we added, Stage Harbor. So we're just working on getting that time series started to look at that area, because that is on Nantucket Sound, an important area that we want to know what's going on there. Like I mentioned, some areas have day and night surveys. So for any given year, there will either be 12 or 24 surveys scheduled. This year is a little special. We have an extra survey cycle in May because there's 2 full moons. So it's either going to be 15 or 30 surveys scheduled. So we get an extra cycle this year, which is exciting. Now you'll see that the difference in day and night being surveyed, partially due to access to the sites can be a little bit harder at night or unsafe. But also north of Cape Cod, generally, we see the same trends during the day as we see it at night. Whereas south of Cape Cod, we notice a bigger difference, and there's usually more spawning at night than during the day. Like Derek mentioned, this is a 17-year time series for some of those sites, some of our longer sites. We have had some added, so some are not quite that 17-year series. DMF started collecting this data in 2008, the earliest sites. This survey only counts adult crabs, so it only captures those mature adult spawning crabs that are coming up on the beach. So it doesn't take into account the juvenile population at all. And like Derek mentioned, any of the regulation changes, it's going to be a little while before they're picked up by this survey because we're only tracking the adults, and it takes these crabs about 9 to 11 years to reach maturity. And just a quick note is that the 2014 data is not used. We briefly switched to a different survey method, and it's different enough from the rest of the time series that we can't compare that year to the whole series. But we switched back in 2015, so we just kind of can't use that 1 year, and we use the rest. As a brief overview of survey protocol, in case you're not familiar or if you're interested in volunteering and want to know a little bit more about what goes into it. Volunteers start at one end of the beach and work their way to the other end, recording the number and sex of all crabs within each quadrat. We tend to use 2 PVC poles with a line between them, a 5-meter line. And then so you use that line and measure all of the crabs within that 5 by 5 meter square going out into the water. You can see this picture here with Derek. He's walking out into the water to check for any crabs within that square quadrat. The protocol varies slightly based on site length and conditions and location. I know some sites, they count all the crabs in every quad, and some do maybe every third, depending on the level of the crabs that are present. But we calculate the density of crabs to sort of standardize instead of using the total number. So that sort of takes into account any difference in length of specific surveys. This is the map and list of all of the sites that are currently being surveyed. So you can see we've got the 2 up north in Plymouth, Kingston, Duxbury Bay, and then around the Cape up to Wellfleet Harbor. Sorry. Out in Pleasant Bay and then through Nantucket Sound and the islands. We have all the list of the organizations that help us with these surveys, help coordinate, train, and staff to make sure that these surveys get done. This next section is, I'm going to show you the plots for each of these individual sites. So it is going to be a little bit of data heavy, lots of plots, but I do think it's important to sort of take the time and recognize the significant effort that goes into getting these surveys completed at all of these beaches. So I broke it down into sections, not only to sort of break it up a little bit and make it not just a bunch of plots immediately, but also there's, as Derek mentioned, a pretty significant difference in the crabs north and south of Cape Cod, both in size and some behavior with the day and the night surveying, as well as there's differences in the level of bait and biomedical harvest in these different areas. So on the bottom right, there's the last 6 years of the percent of bait landings from Cape Cod Bay. So this is all of the percentage of crabs that were caught in Cape Cod Bay during those years. And you can see that it went down significantly after that 2024 regulation change. So up first, we have the plot from Duxbury. So I'll just take a little bit of extra time and walk through this first plot, and then I'll go a little bit quicker through the later ones. The day survey data is in orange and the night is in blue. Along the y-axis, we have female density. Now we use female density instead of just total crab density due to the skewed sex ratios that we'll see on the beaches. Generally, during any one spawning event, the males will come up onto the beach and stay on the beach and try to spawn with multiple females, whereas usually the females will come up, lay their eggs, and then leave the beach. So at any one time, you'll tend to see more males than females, which is why we use the female density instead of total crab density. The horizontal dotted and dashed lines are the time series median for both the day and the night series. And so the point, either the circle or the diamond, is the average density for that year with the variance in the data around it. It is worth noting that some of these points have large error bars and variance in the data, and that's in part just the way the survey is designed. We start surveying before the crowds are there, and then we continue surveying after the peak. So it is expected to get some variance in data from before the crowds are there, during the peak, and after they've left. Yeah, you can see we had, some peaks and high years in 2013 and 2016. But since then, it's decreased and it's been relatively steady around that time series median for Duxbury. This is Long Beach. This is a relatively, it's a shorter time series, but you can see very clearly here that the day and the night survey trends track really well together. Those medians are pretty close, and those actual yearly values are also relatively close to each other, with some higher values in 2021 and 2022, but overall, this year was right on that median, with the last 2 years a little bit lower. This is Millway in Barnstable Harbor. Again, those day and night trends are relatively close to each other, and you can see we've had a relatively sharp increase the last few years. These values for the night surveys, at least, are pretty high above that time series median, and the day survey this year was right on that median. If I'm going too fast, just yell at me. This is Long Pasture, also in Barnstable Harbor. Again, the day and night, relatively similar for the medians, some slight variance for the yearly means. The night surveys were stopped after 2022, just for some safety issues with volunteers. I believe there's like a creek running that you have to pass to get to the site. And at night, it's just not safe to cross the creek when you don't know how deep it is. So only day surveys have been conducted since 2023. Some peak high values in 2022 for both day and night. And then the day values for 2023 have been consistently above that time series median. This is Sanctuary Beach in Wellfleet Harbor. This is also only daytime surveys. The first 2 years, above that time series median, and then a peak in 2022, very high value, but overall it's been kind of bouncing around that median. Last year was a relatively low survey year. We're not quite sure why. We did have a pretty big storm near the expected peak for spawning this past year. I don't have that data readily available right now, but like I know anecdotally, like I did some of the surveys at Stage Harbor, and when we would usually expect the peak in the 3rd week of May, there had been a really big storm the week before, so that could play a part in some of the differences that we saw. This is Indian Neck, also in Wellfleet Harbor. Day and night surveys tracking pretty well together. 2019 and 2021, the night surveys were considerably higher than the daytime surveys. Some lower years below that median, but the last 2 years have been pretty consistently above. This is Great Island in Wellfleet Harbor. Some stable years, 2015 through 2021. Increase for 2022, 4 and 5, with I believe 0 crabs in 2023. But it is important to note that the abundance at this site has historically been very low. I believe the record is 4 female crabs in one survey. So that's the most amount of female crabs that has ever been seen in one survey there. So it's just sort of an important consideration when you see 0 crabs. These are our Outer Cape sites. So there has been no bait landings in Pleasant Bay or these Outer Cape sites. Historically, has there ever been?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, so there used to be, but there hasn't been for a while. And this area does have an over 50-year history of biomedical harvest. Because we're the first state that started bleeding crabs, and so we have a very long history, established history of biomedical fishing here. First up, we have Priscilla's Landing. You can see a pretty clear increase after 2019, where all of those values have been above that time series median. And 2025 was a pretty good year, as well as 2020, pretty high. Marsh 2-3, this has consistently been a pretty good survey site. You can see that clear sort of increase from 2015 and on, and 2021 is that first high peak here. We do have 2 years of data from 2001 and 2002 from James Peary at the University of Rhode Island. We feel comfortable using this data because they follow the same protocol that we use now. So it just sort of gives like an earlier reference point, even though we don't have all of the years in between. This is Erica's Beach, a pretty strong positive outlier for 2025. We're not entirely sure why that is, but it's definitely an interesting and positive thing to see. But even before that 2025 point, it was pretty steadily kind of bouncing near and around that median. For our Nantucket Sound region, this is historically where the majority of the harvest has come from, and you can see the jump from 2023 to 2024 to 97% of all of the bait landings come from Nantucket Sound. So we think it's especially crucial that we get this survey data to keep an eye on any potential impacts from the fishery. This area does also have biomedical harvest in addition to the bait harvest. This is a short time series. This is the one that I mentioned. We started to kind of augment losing Morris Island. And it's an area where we do tend to see a lot of crabs. But again, it's a short time series. So there's only so much you can do with that data. This is specifically female density, but on the next slide, I have combined total density because there was only one nighttime survey conducted in 2024. And the volunteers just got so overwhelmed by the number of crabs that they weren't able to sex them. They were getting, hundreds of crabs in each quadrant. And so it just got to a point where they weren't able to keep track of sex. So this is why it's on a separate plot. But I do think it's, it was worth sharing that we have this data point. We just can't use it in the regular time series because they weren't sexed. This is our Bass River site. Again, there was 1 year where only one night survey was completed. 2025 and 2024 had pretty high values over that time series median, and the day has been relatively steady around that median as well. Monomoy Beach in Nantucket, another very strong positive value for the night surveys in 2025. And the past 2 years for daytime have been above the time series median as well. Is Warren's Landing, also on Nantucket. The daytime survey trend is relatively hard to see. It lays pretty close to that time series median, but you can see a generally increasing for the daytime trends with a very high value in 2024. This is Tashmoo on Martha's Vineyard. Again, the daytime trend is a little harder to see, but relatively consistent and somewhat slightly increasing for some of these values in later years. And the nighttime we've seen consistently above the time series median, except for 2022. And lastly, our one Buzzards Bay site, Swift's Beach. So the 2024 bait landings data is confidential due to the, we have confidentiality laws, as there's only one person fishing there, so we can't give you the exact number, but it's low. And this is that time series for Swift's Beach. It's not great. You can see that it's been pretty consistently below the time series median for nighttime surveys and daytime surveys over the last few years. The biggest thing that we think is driving this, or could be, is there's beach grooming that goes on in this area, so we think that that could be having an effect, but we don't know for sure. So we have reached out to the town, and they are not going to be doing the beach grooming anymore. So hopefully that makes a difference. Okay, that's all the plots. It's not important to be able to necessarily read every single number. I know.
On the final?
No, there's no test. The big picture here is just seeing the change in color. So the darker orange is less than 50% completion rates for any given year. Yellow is between 50 and 75% completion, and the green is above 75% completion. So that's what we like to see. So you can see that sort of in the earlier years, we had less completion. So it's broken up by site, both day and night, just because it is sometimes harder to get completion on night surveys, both from safety and just time of day. So we really have been making an effort in increasing the completion for Nantucket Sound. This past year, we only had one site that was below 50% completion, and that was Bass River at night. And that was just due to issues physically accessing the site. So we were unable to do that. But overall, we've been getting more green, and that's in large part due to increased volunteer effort. Like Derek mentioned, I got 500 emails in the first 24 hours after our social media post. So as much as it was overwhelming, it's really great to see that much engagement and involvement. This is breaking down how did the 2025 average density compare to that time series median? Was it above, below, or equal? Above is in green, below is in that pinkish red, and equal is in white. The NAs are if we don't have enough data to make any conclusions. So that was at Stage Harbor where we have that short time series. So overall, 71% of the means were above, 21% were below, and 8% were equal. We had 4 record high annual means set in 2025. Tashmoo at night, which is a 17-year time series. Monomoy Beach for both day and night surveys, which is also a 17-year time series. And Erica's Beach during the day, which is also a 17-year time series. And we had no record low means set this year. This is taking a sort of larger picture at the 15 and 10-year trends. So it's classified as either increasing or decreasing, with any statistically significant values bolded and asterisked. For the 15-year series, 71% of them were increasing, 4 of which were statistically significant, 29% were decreasing, with 1 of them being statistically significant decrease, and that's that Buzzards Bay site, Swift's Beach. For our 10-year trend, 90% were increasing, 5 of which were statistically significant, 10% were decreasing, with no statistically significant trends. So this is a ranking of the density by site. So this takes the average density for the 2025 surveys, day and night, and compares them against each other. I know it's a big table, but I feel like I like including it so you can sort of see where does my beach rank in comparison to others. You can kind of see for the day surveys, you've got the group of the outer Cape Cod beaches at the top. And for night surveys, those Nantucket Sound sites also at the top. This is also my plug of if you are interested in seeing more crabs, maybe you volunteer at one of the sites that has a lower density and you're interested in seeing more, coming out to one of these sites that has a higher density Not only because these areas are important to monitor because of the fishery, but you get to see more crabs. A huge thank you to any survey volunteers and the volunteer organizations. We truly could not do these surveys without you. It's just way too much for us to handle. And so it's really, really great that we get this much collaboration to get this data. We had a new record of 336 volunteers this year in 2025, which was up from, I think, around 270 in 2024. So this is, yeah, very, very collaborative, and we could not do it without you. Also, my shameless plug, if you want to volunteer, these are the survey dates this year. Like I said, we have one extra cycle. So the first survey is April 29th, and the last survey is July 1st. So the days are listed out on the left, as well as highlighted on the calendars on the right. Yeah. If you want any more information or are interested in volunteering, please email the DMF Horseshoe Crab email. Not my email. We set up this separate email so that way my inbox won't get overwhelmed again. Just to sort of keep better track of anyone that does want to volunteer. We have that separate email set up. And that's all I have.
All right, I'm back. All right, so now I'm gonna go over the trawl survey. So that started in 1978, so it's a 48-year time series. It's conducted in the spring and the fall, so May and September. Uses a random stratified design. So basically what that means is every year, the staff of the project goes out and picks at random where to tow. They're not targeting crabs, they're not targeting the species, it's a random selection. We do about 100 stations per survey. In 2020 was skipped because of COVID. The survey collects biological data on size, like chromosomal width. It gets both adults and juveniles. The spawning survey gets just adults. This one gets adults and juveniles. We started collecting sex data in 1982. So in the plots, you'll see the data start in 1982, but did go a little bit earlier than that, just didn't sex them. Let's collect number and weight per toe for each of their toes. Also location of the catch. On the right side there, you can see the boat that's used is Lord Michelle. It's a NOAA vessel, the dragger. And down the bottom there, you can see the map of the regions. Regions 4 or 5 are north of Cape Cod. We consider regions 1 through 3 for horseshoe crabs to be south of Cape Cod. So the data will be broken up that way because the reason we break it up that way is there's 2 different populations of crabs in the state. North of Cape Cod, they differ genetically from south of Cape Cod, as well as exploitation rates, size maturity, and various other factors, including tagging. There's not much tagging information as far as crabs going from north to south. Generally, they stay on their side, so there's not much mixing. So there's 2 different populations there, so look at them differently. This is North Cape Cod, the Gulf of Maine. This is the number of crabs per toe. This is the y-axis. Y-axis is stratified mean number per toe. This dashed line here is time series median. These data points, the circles there, are individual data points. The bluish line is the lowest smoother, and the shaded area around the lowest smoother is confidence interval around that smoother. The dashed line going up and down is for 2010. I mentioned earlier there's an inflection point in most of our data sets. That's why that's there to look at that. It's not as obvious in this plot because we don't have much harvest in this area, but it's more obvious in the spots where we do have more harvest that we see an increasing trend starting in 2010. Basically, we have the females on the left side, males on the right side, spring across the top, and fall on the bottom. You see a slight increasing trend with spring for females, not much of a trend there for males. A lot of zeros there for the males in the spring. Fall kind of went up and down, some higher data points, but came down fairly recently. But the 2025 data point was pretty good. All the 2025 data points are above the time series medians. And we're seeing an increasing trend since 2010 in the fall for males as well. This is southern New England. This is where most of the harvest occurs. Seeing the spring survey, we're seeing a huge increasing trend. We set a new record for females in 2025. Males, not quite as high, but still pretty good, increasing trend. Not quite the same trend in the fall survey, kind of around the time series median for both males and females. But all the 2025 data points are well above the time series medians and among the top 5 for each of their respective indices. The spring surveys are also statistically significant over the course of the time series, so increasing trends are there. Moving to the same survey, also conducted with the Mass DMF Resource Assessment Project. Started in 1976, so it's 50 years of data. Horseshoe crabs have consistently counted since 1984. There's 6 different embayments. Great Pond over here. Then we have Wapoit, Tuat Bay, Lewis, Bass River, and Stage Harbor. It was originally designed to monitor age 0 winter flounder, so baby winter flounder, but it's used to monitor many other species, including horseshoe crabs. It also monitors other species that eat horseshoe crab eggs, so it's a valuable resource for that as well. It does counts or presence absence, depending on the species. For horseshoe crabs, it's counts. This is the index for that. On the y-axis, you have stratified mean number per toe. Black line there is a general additive model. The circles are individual data points by year. The grayish line is the time series median. The shaded area is the confidence interval around that line. And the red dashed line is that 2010 line I mentioned earlier. We're seeing increasing trends since then. 2025 data point is the third highest one in the time series. Abundance has been improving since around 2010. And all data points have been above normal, above the time series median for 11 straight years. There's also a statistically significant trend in that survey. So to summarize the horseshoe crab survey abundance trends, 79% in 2025 are above the survey medians, at or above. 3 beaches set new record highs for female density. 0 set record lows. For 15-year trends, 71% are above the time are increasing. 4 is statistically significant, with only 1 negative trend. The last 10 years, 90% are increasing. 5% are statistically significant. None with negative trends, statistically. For 2025, the trawl survey north of Cape Cod, all 2025 data points are above the time series medians. South of Cape Cod, all 2025 data points were among the top 5 in their respective time series, including a record high for females in 2025 in the spring survey. Spring surveys have been above the time series medians the last 10 years for both sexes, and statistically significant increasing trends for both sexes in the spring. The same survey has been above the time series median for the last 11 years, and is also statistically significant. So one of the questions we sometimes get is this fishery sustainable? Basically, all the harvest in the state comes from this area in red now. Looking at these surveys, there's 14 different surveys that are conducted in that area. You can look at them by males, females, by survey type, trawl survey, same survey, spawning survey. You can look at them by time of year, spring, summer, fall, or who collects the data. Mass DNF, Mass Audubon, Maria Mitchell, and Antarctic Conservation Association, the foundation. Every single one of these trends is increasing. So where all the harvest is occurring, all the surveys are increasing, every single one without exception. So that shows that this is sustainable. To summarize, surveys and commercial monitoring are conducted to provide information so people can make informed decisions. That's why we do this. That's why your taxpayer dollars pay for these surveys. We're showing increasing trends, and we're mostly between time series norms and record highs in our surveys. There's no evidence that harvest is having a negative impact over horseshoe crab abundance in the last 15 years. DNF has put a substantial effort into monitoring horseshoe crabs. There's more commercial effort putting a sampling test for horseshoe crabs than any of the species in the state except for lobsters and groundfish. This is the only species that DNF does an annual conference for. So there's no other conference for other species that we work with. So this is the only one we do. As I mentioned before, we have 4 staff members working horseshoe crabs this year. And I'd like to thank the spawning survey volunteers, the volunteer organizations. That survey would not happen without them. The fishers, dealers, and biomedical labs for welcoming us on the boats, facilities, and labs. The fishers and dealers for filling out the catch reports. The DNF resource assessment crew for providing data, as well as the DNF stats program for auditing and providing data, as well as the DNF staff that collected data, and UMass IT for helping with this meeting. And I will take any questions, or if Laura has any questions for Laura, please let us know. And Mark.
Hey there. Thanks for this. Thanks for having this meeting. I remember when it was a sleepy little meeting at the old building with just,
The rest of people I can hear you.
yeah. Anyway, I remember the old days when this was just a sleepy little meeting of those of us who did the spawning surveys over in the old building. And I appreciate all the effort. You know, we see you. We know this is what, the 37th most important fishery in terms of dollar value.
Yeah.
And you're putting a lot of effort into it, and we appreciate that. Could you go back just a couple to the Nantucket Sound? Like, we're feeling very hopeful. We understand that some of these are increasing. We supply 8 of those 16 sites, right? The spawning data for 50% of the sites, and we raise our own money to do it because we believe in this. And we see the increases at Pleasant Bay. That's we're there, we're the ones collecting the data, it's heartening. And then, you know, Priscilla's, Nauset, and then what you're seeing down around eastern Nantucket Sound. And what they all have in common is a long-term bait closure, right? Monomoy, yeah.
Well,
Monomoy,
this whole
Pleasant
area,
Bay
we're seeing
has a
here,
20-year bait closure in Pleasant Bay.
this whole area, Mark, that's not true.
What do you mean?
So you're talking about bait closures through
I'm
here.
talking about Monomoy.
Monomoy,
Can you point to where most of the harvest is in Nantucket
it's all
Sound?
through here.
Right next to Monomoy. So Monomoy is a 20-year bait and biomedical closure. It's a spawning sanctuary. It's huge. It's so important to the dynamic. And we know that from tagging studies that we collaborated on. Without Monomoy, that's not viable. And if you look at, you say the increases started in 2010. So you always said you wouldn't expect to see results from the lunar closures until 10 years after they started. So that's 2020. So the one starting in 2010, that's 10 years after the Monomoy closure. Pleasant Bay, that's 10 years after that closure of bait harvest. Priscilla's Landing, increasing. I acknowledge those are all increasing. We're feeling very hopeful about those sites. I've seen a piping plover eating a horseshoe crab egg at Priscilla's Landing. There's so many crabs there now.
Mark, I'm sorry, do you have a question? Because we have a bunch of questions online and we're trying to keep on schedule.
I just want to clarify the management context of the sites that are doing well, and it's that they have long-term bait closures, right? And that's a clear pattern in the data. Cape Cod Bay, we know is much, it's like 2 orders of magnitude lower in some cases, the spawning indices. And the 17-year trend for wellfleet, my 3 wellfleet sites is still decreasing. We're hoping it's ticking up, but there's just such a huge difference. And the clear pattern is when you have long-term bait closures and the sanctuary effect of Monomoy, that supports these higher and increasing
All right, so
populations.
Mark, I agree this is closed here, but we take the bait crabs, they're all from over here. So they're not coming from Monomoy, as you said. They've been coming from here for many, many years. So that's where we're seeing the catch, that's where we're seeing the crabs.
Right, we know from the tagging studies that they move from Monomoy out into Nantucket Sound.
So we see them in the fall, correct? In the
Yeah.
spring, we see them all through here. In the fall, they aggregate here. Okay, so that's, when you're talking about Monomoy, during the spawning season, they're all through here. Not on Monomoy necessarily, they're through here.
But I just had the understanding that a lot of the dragger harvest was
In the fall,
pretty
In the fall.
close to Monomoy.
in the fall,
Yeah,
not spring.
right. So there's no denying that spawning sanctuary, just logically, is really supporting that Nantucket Sound fishery.
But during the spawning season, there's some there certainly. We're seeing them all through here. Like our survey data shows them all through there. Trawl survey, everything.
I have a question.
Yep.
Are the slides gonna be available?
Yes, plus the recording, yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Dan?
What's the size composition of horseshoe crabs in the beach survey?
It depends on where you are. So North and South Cape Cod has differences. The biggest ones we see are in.
Sorry, my bad. In the, beach seine survey, the ones that's being done on the south side of the.
I'll pass it to Steve, that's his area. That's the survey he runs, so I'll let him answer that because they see him.
I'll try. I oversee the survey. The person that's running it right now is out in the field today. But we have not historically collected size information from that survey. So I can't tell you exactly what size they are over the last 50 years.
We do see a mix of sizes, but it's
Are they mostly juveniles?
a mix.
So my question actually has a point. So when you said we may not see the signal from the spawning beach closures for 10 years.
Mhm.
I think you might see it in the beach seine survey sooner if you're getting smaller crabs.
And the trawl survey, because they
Yeah.
go to that part of the ocean earlier. If they don't necessarily mature out there, you'll
Right.
see them there first too.
And then would you speak to why the Swift's beach grooming was deemed problematic?
So at that site there, they've been grooming their beaches in the town of Wareham for a long time. And basically what they're doing is they're taking a big machine, a tractor, and going through the sand during the spawning season at low tide. So all that area where the crabs are laying their eggs, they're going right through that with a rake and stirring up all that sediment. So basically going right through all the nests and beating them all up, and I don't think eggs have much of a chance. They're doing that across the whole entire town. Go to other areas, like say where I live in Bourne, we see more crabs there. But in Wareham, we're not seeing much. We're seeing that declining trend. It's really sticking out compared to all the survey agencies we have in the state. That one was really going down. So we think that's why. We talked to the town, got them to stop doing that. So we think we're in good shape going forward. Okay.
Sharon and I do the nighttime survey of the Indian Neck and Wellfleet, and last year, as the season went on, we were seeing more dead crabs, mostly females, than live ones on the beach. And the people at the harbor also told me they took a pickup load of dead washed ashore crabs down there. Not sure what's going on, no overt signs of mortality
Yeah.
causes, but we're concerned about it. I don't know if anyone else is seeing this in any of the other beaches or not.
I haven't heard it there, but I've always been kind of, there's not a ton of crabs in Wellfleet, but I always see a high proportion of dead crabs in Wellfleet. So that's always been confusing to me too. I don't know if it's related to other fisheries there or if it's just the wind just blows them up there. I'm not really sure, but I've seen the same thing up there as well. Good. Well,
Could you explain how the same surveys are done? I realize there's a large net that they. Could you explain how the same surveys are done? I know there's a large net that they use, but I'm not sure what the process is.
I'll go straight to the source.
So, with the beach sand survey that we've done, there's a standard seine net that's used, and there's a spreader rope that goes between it, so it always spreads the same exact distance. At each one of the sites that we have, there are 3 replicate seine ball stock. So they go out into the water, collect the depth information, that helps us calculate. We use a rangefinder to calculate the distance from the shore to the net. That gives us the distance that we're covering, so we can standardize everything to an area. The nets then it's set parallel to the beach, 2 people, 1 on each side, pull it up to the beach, everything's processed. And then at that site, they do that 2 more times. And then all the counts and species are put together as one site information for that. And that's done at every site. We do it at high tide because that was when it was determined that young of the year flounder were most abundant from a lot of work they did in the 60s and 70s. So they're standardized for the tide at each site. And we also have other factors that go in, like we make sure that we're not doing it on weekends. We try to do it earlier in the morning to avoid like it being stirred up by people, especially as the summer goes on, things like that. So we've tried to standardize it so it's happening during the same Julian date range every year. So that's part of it. Certainly happy to go into more if there's any questions.
Thank you.
Let's take a couple online
Yeah.
questions.
All right, I'm going to do this in order of how they appeared, so. This is from Susan Reddy. There are studies that state the females are targeted for bleeding as they are bigger, and that the bleeding stresses them so much that they don't breed for a year or 2. Any comment?
So there is a difference in size between the 2 sexes. And I think the difference in the data as far as what they're bleeding is largely dependent on that size. Because we have a 7-inch minimum legal size. That means that some of the crabs, the males, can't be bled at all, even when they're mature. As far as a year or 2 later, I haven't seen that. I've seen during that same spawning season, there's some papers out of UNH that show like that if they're bled that same year, they may not go back and spawn that same year. I've not seen that a year or 2 later. I'm not aware of anything of that regard. But some of that research from UNH also really stresses those crabs out and uses methods that are legal in the state. That's the other part.
I just want to add on that some of the questions or concerns that we have about any kind of sublethal effects are the reason that we went ahead with a full spawning closure. So the closure that was implemented in 2024 was intended to sort of deal with this a little bit of uncertainty in terms of once the crabs are bled and go back into the water, we know immediately we're not seeing that mortality based on our data. But there is still questions of what happens like 2 days later or whatever. So that's why we went ahead and implemented that full spawning closure to not disrupt the spawning behavior and activity.
This question is from Helen Miranda Wilson, regarding the biomedical regs. Who is enforcing this and with what degree of attentiveness?
The Massachusetts Environmental Police do that. I know they've done some trips. I don't know how many, but every year I have to send a compliance report to ASMC and they report how many violations they had, and there haven't been any violations in the last few years.
How do they stop people from doing it?
Stop people from doing what?
Over harvesting or handling the crabs in a detrimental way.
We're also there a lot too, so we also do a lot of observation. We're not law enforcement, but we are out there quite a bit, saving these crabs, and we don't really see anything. So there's a few things we see, like barrels over two-thirds full sometimes, but that's about the extent of it.
Yeah, I mean, if they catch somebody violating any of the laws, they're gonna issue citations, they're gonna issue fines. And if it's egregious, then there's the potential that there's permit restrictions that would be pursued through DMF.
Uh,
Yeah.
May
But
I
again,
add, may
we're on
I
the
add
boat.
about
Sorry, go ahead.
Wellfleet? Wellfleet, the town applied for a moratorium some years ago, and it was submitted, beautifully, perfectly. And the reason is that Wellfleet has a special circumstance regarding the horseshoe crabs, which had really pretty much disappeared because of overharvesting. And we have a situation with our intertidal bottom that really affects our huge shellfishing community industry. And that is, we have bamboo worms, which is a polycate worm. And we were told that there was no science that said that horseshoe crabs ate them. And there was science, and it was submitted, and it was disregarded. And that situation has gotten worse. In other words, there are more worms here. And anecdotally, from people who really pay attention, you can put horseshoe crabs on your grant, on your aquaculture lease, and watch them eating the worms. People
So
do
I'm
that.
sorry, I'm gonna interrupt. Is there a question in here? Because we are running out of time and I want to make sure we get as many questions answered as we can.
Yeah, the question is, has any relation to what they do environmentally, the crabs, in relation to these polycate worms been done? That was my question. Thank you.
I'm not aware of any more research, but I will speak to Wellfleet. During the course of my career, there's only been one harvester there. And based on the new closures for the spawning season, it's going to make it a lot more difficult for anyone to harvest crabs by hand. So we're seeing a lot less harvest in areas like Wellfleet Bay. It's less than 1% in all of Cape Cod Bay comes from that area as far as all of Cape Cod Bay. So you're going to see a lot less of any kind of harvest in that area.
All right, moving on, from Steve Doctor, is water holding required on boats while collecting?
On draggers, yes. Yep.
From Edward Nardi, is there an analysis that confirms that the 99% returned alive stay alive, or is there greater mortality shortly after they are returned to the wild?
I view that as a minimum. So you see 1% at the point of release. I would expect it to increase in days after. There's a number of studies that have been done, ranging from 0 to 30%. That's why ASMC uses the 15% for management purposes. It's the midpoint there. There's a group of scientists, including myself, who are reviewing those papers right now to get a more accurate estimate of mortality.
Yeah, and we'll be talking a little bit at the end of the presentations today about some new work that DMF is going to be engaging in to help address that question.
And that kind of answers the next question, from New England Coastal Wildlife Alliance, asking if DMF has studied the long-term impacts of survivability on horseshoe crabs after release.
So there was a paper done a few years ago by Dave Smith et al. And it looked at mortality rates long-term after bleeding. In that paper, there actually was a higher survival rate for bled crabs, not the unbled, not the unbled, the bled crabs had a higher survival rate. Now there's a caveat to that paper, and that's that they used different populations to look at mortality. The bled crabs came from offshore. The crabs that were not bled were on spawning areas. So those crabs could have been older. There could be differences in natural mortality between those two groups. But based on the study, it was very low mortality rates long-term compared to the other sources.
Let's take two more questions and then we're going to move on to the next speaker.
This is from Chris Dodge, it's kind of going into the post-mortality rate questions. Mentioned that he saw the 3% post-mortality rate. Wants to know how that information is collected, if the crabs are back in the wild at that point.
Much.
I think you might have had on one of the slides, you accidentally put post-release instead of post-bleeding for one of our mortality estimates. But currently the data that we collect is all post-bleeding, not post-release. So I think that might be that.
The second part of that question, is there any data on spawning success if the crab was collected before the spawning closure?
We don't see much happening before the spawning closure. There was a graph there I showed earlier. It's a very flat line. Basically, it's this one guy, I think, who's doing some scald. Sorry.
Go back to your landings graph, Derek, your cumulative landings graph.
Gotcha.
Explain the amount of harvest that occurs before the closure.
Okay. A lot of slides here.
I'm getting dizzy.
Don't look. We'll tell you when to look.
All right, right here. So if you look at this figure here, you can see cumulative percentage over time.
Can you
So,
explain that, Derek? What
Yep.
does that mean?
so basically what happens is you have 0% to 100%. So over the course of the season, there's a quota of 140,000 crabs. So if you have 100%, it's about 140. So you're starting with 0 crabs, and over time, as more and more crabs get landed, this value goes up. It's just added over time. So say you have 70,000 crabs, that's where you hit the 50% mark. So this kind of accumulates over time. This line here is very flat. That means there's no crabs coming in. This line here is very flat. That means there's no crabs coming in. So we have a very, very small amount of crabs coming in this period of time here, which is like, I don't know, 2-3%, 5% maybe.
And those are bait crabs, Derek?
Those are bait crabs, correct. So those are crabs that are coming in, probably from the dredge fleet. But there's not much there at all. It doesn't really pick up until after the spawning closure happens, June 8th. Jared?
Well, the biomedical data is confidential, so we can't similarly portray that. Do we have any biomedical harvest that occurs before the end of the spawning period?
I'm not sure I can answer that. But basically, you see when we sample, we're sampling the vinyl fishery when they're actually operating. Brett, you want to say something?
Just, I had a question and a comment. Question is regarding the slide about coastline.
Brett, give 1 second.
Wait, microphone's coming.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, and make it quick if you could, please, Brett.
Yes, just quickly a comment and a question. Question revolves around the coastwide mortality. You showed a slide, it just got by me, but I just wanted to look at the overall mortality over time. Okay, great. So that looks like it's maybe even trending down. Okay. And then just a clarification on Mr. Doctor's question about in water holding on the trawlers. I think the language in the regulation states it must be running water.
Correct.
Because we've actually seen some detrimental effects to crabs floating around on in water floating around on a choppy day or something like that. So
Yeah,
to
just
clarify,
running seawater. It's
running
not,
seawater.
doesn't have to be a tank, just running seawater.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thanks, folks. We're gonna move on so that we can stay remotely on time. Our next speaker is Jennifer Lander. She is with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Division of Marine Resources, which is based on Long Island. Jennifer has a degree, a bachelor degree in science and marine biology, and from the University of Rhode Island in 2017. And she earned her master's degree in marine conservation and policy from Stony Brook University's School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences in 2025. Before joining DEC in 2022, Jennifer worked with the National Park Service and several environmental organizations on coastal and marine conservation projects. At DEC, she manages New York's horseshoe crab spawning survey and coordinates monitoring and fisheries management efforts for species including horseshoe crabs, blue crabs, and whelk. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for making the drive up, and please take it away.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's actually funny, straight from my undergrad, I was in the old SMAS building, so it's always great to be back in New Bedford and make the drive up. But yes, just a little about myself. I am the biologist, or one of the biologists in the Marine Invertebrates Unit at the Division of Marine Resources in New York. And like Derek, I sit on the Horseshoe Crab Technical Committee. And I get to work with him and other state representatives on all things horseshoe crabs. So it's always great to be here and talk about what I love to do. So DC remains in compliance with the Commission's fisheries management plan for horseshoe crabs. And the overall goal of DEC is to improve the stock status of horseshoe crabs while maintaining its broadest range of uses. So that includes ecosystem services, sustainable commercial harvest, and also just overall observation and appreciation of the species. So just a little bit of the management history. The FMP was developed in 1998, and in 2000, the commission established state-by-state quotas for harvest for bait. New York was allocated just over 366,000 crabs annually. In 2004, DEC voluntarily reduced that quota to less than half of the FMP's allowable take, so our voluntary quota is at 150,000 crabs. In more recent years, we had in 2020, DC implemented 2 5-day lunar closures in late May and early June to coincide with those moons to allow the horseshoe crabs to deposit their eggs on the beach undisturbed. In 2022, DC developed regulations for the use of bait bags in the whelk fishery to pretty much use less overall horseshoe crabs per pot. And lastly, in 2025, DC implemented 2 additional lunar closures to coincide with all the new and full moons in May and June. So in total, we have 4 5-day lunar closures in total. Other management includes areas closed to hand harvest for those who are familiar with Long Island. So we got our North Shore beaches. So we got West Meadow Beach, Cedar Beach and Mount Sinai. We also have the entirety of Fire Island National Seashore and also Gateway National Recreation Area, which pretty much closes the entirety of Jamaica Bay to harvest. We also have permitting requirements. Commercial fishermen must hold both a crab permit and a horseshoe crab permit. And both of those permits are limited by license caps. Mandatory monthly reporting is required for all permit holders, and failure to comply will result in permit restrictions, either current permits or future permits. Just an overall of the fishery in New York. So New York is only a bait fishery for whelk and American eel. There is no biomedical harvest in New York. There are no biomedical permits issued for New York. Basic fishery characteristics, at least for the past 5 years, majority of harvest is occurring in the South Shore bays. That's about over half. Most landings are hand harvest, and the peak harvest is occurring in that May and June, coinciding with those peak spawning months. And while this is the characteristic for the past 5 years, it's been pretty consistent for the history of the fishery in New York. Looking at this year, so the graph on the left, you can actually see at the top, we have our green dash bar. That is the commission's quota. And then that solid yellow line is our 150,000 voluntary quota. Since the implementation of our lunar closures, we have been under our 150,000 voluntary quota consistently, and well below the commission's quota. This is looking at 2025 landings and also 2024. That gray line is the 2024 landings, so it's still under that 150,000. It was closer. And then in 2025, there was a big drop, about half of what we saw in 2024. Only about 75,000 crabs were landed. That's considered to be because of the additional lunar closures that were implemented that year, and also just a change in whelk demand. The graph on the left is just showing percent by area of harvest. And like you said before, South Shore Bay harvest is consistent as the majority of harvest, but there's also pretty variety of harvests in the Long Island Sound, and the Peconics and a little bit in New York Harbor. Looking at stock assessments, inputs for New York. I'm not gonna get into the big details of like how the assessments run, but overall, if you're not familiar, stock status relies on trend analysis of survey data compared to 1998 levels. So for New York, there's 4 surveys that are used, and the percentage of that surveys within New York is below that 1998 levels. We'll consider the stock status. So for New York, stock status after the 2024 stock assessment update is still in 4 status. We have 3 out of the 4 surveys below that 1998 level. So the surveys being used are the Connecticut Long Island Sound Trawl Survey, Jamaica Bay Beach Seine, Little Neck and Manhattan Beach Seine, and also the Peconic Trawl Survey. So the one that is actually showing a major improvement is above the 1998 levels is the Connecticut Long Island Sound Trawl Survey. This data only goes up to 2022, but looking at 2023 and 2024, it is following that increasing trend and it's still at an overall high, which is great because it is a large geospatial survey for the entirety of Long Island Sound. You'll actually see the one at the top right on the New York NEMAP survey. So that is also showing a really good increasing trend. However, because it does not have a 1998 reference point, it cannot be used in the stock status. So even though it has that increasing trend, it's also a large geospatial scope. It just cannot be used at this time in stock status. This is just another way to visualize our status stock status inputs. So A and B, those are our fixed station beach seines. C, the Peconic Trawl, which has been actually having an increase since 2017, but it's still well below that historical 1998 levels. And then our largest geospatial, D and E, which is the Connecticut Long Island Sound Trawl Survey and also NEMAP. So it does show the big geospatial range between each of these surveys. It's also important to note that a lot of these surveys are not geared toward horseshoe crabs. They are catching them as bycatch. So, but they are our longest standing surveys, and that's why they are incorporated into the assessment. So let's look at something that is geared toward horseshoe crabs. So our spawning survey and tagging survey was initiated in 2007 with DEC, Cornell Cooperative Extension, and Stony Brook University SOMAS program due to concerns about the low abundance of horseshoe crabs in New York waters. So the site for the survey has grown to 30 monitoring sites with over 800 volunteers annually. So it is wouldn't be able to do it without the many volunteers. So I have to thank them for willing to go out at 1 a.m. to survey these horseshoe crabs. It's a big job. We have 12 sample nights generally a year. Unlike Massachusetts, we sample fully at night. So there's no daytime surveys. It's only nighttime, evening, high tide. We also, based on these sites, they range from Staten Island all the way to Fisher's Island. So for analysis, we divide them into different spatial zones. So we have our Long Island Sound North Shore sites, our Peconic Estuary sites, South Shore Estuary, and then our Jamaica Bay region, which also includes New York Harbor, Raritan Bay, and Gravesend Bay. So our tagging data, so actually in 2025, we released just under 5,000 tags. We recaptured about 650 tags just for 2025. And that is consistent with our years. So we have a lot of good tagging data. This was actually analyzed by Justin Bob et al. In 2019 using tagging data from 2007 to 2016 to look at survival estimates of horseshoe crabs in New York waters. So you see it was broken into 3 regions with the North Shore also encompassing the Peconic Estuary. So Jamaica Bay South Shore had lower survival estimates comparatively to North Shore, which the North Shore survival probability is pretty on par with Delaware Bay survival for horseshoe crabs. And it's generally considered that, you know, the lower survival of South Shore and Jamaica Bay could be to multiple factors, different harvest pressures. Like I said, majority of harvest is in those South Shore estuaries. But again, the Jamaica Bay region is predominantly close to harvest, so there could be other environmental factors, or not other just overall factors that could be implementing and impacting that region. Also looking at migration rates, so it was found that the regions have high site fidelity, and that there's actually limited exchange between these three regions. So crabs that are tagged, say, in one of the South Shore estuaries are usually being recaptured within that same region. Looking at spawning survey trends, so indices of spawning activity is actually analyzed for each site, but we do look at it at the full estuary level. And we also look at it for both male, female, and total. But kind of like what Laura said, we're going to just be looking at the female for various reasons, mainly for that skewed sex ratio. So at this point, we do have the full data set, but we decided to analyze for only sites that have that past 10 years of data from 2014 to 2025. And this is just representing that first voluntary management change that was initiated back in 2004, that reduction to 150,000 crabs. And like Derek and Laura have been saying, it's due to that like about 10-year maturity lag. So after that 2004, we're looking kind of anything past that 2014. And it's actually found that Long Island Sound, Jamaica Bay, and South Shore, as on an estuary level, are all significantly increasing in female abundance. The only estuary is Peconic. That's neither having a significant increase or a significant decrease. It's just having stable over the years. So just overall looking forward, most likely the next commission benchmark will be in 2029. So it's just another look at a comprehensive and unbiased examination of horseshoe crabs all along the coast, but also for New York, working with the assessment team and our regional counterparts to look into incorporating additional data sets like New York NEMAP and our spawning surveys. For the 2024 stock assessment update, New York wasn't expecting an increase in abundance for our surveys. You know, empirical data, like Derek was saying, there's usually that 10-year lag for that response from a reduction of horseshoe crab harvest. So we are expecting to see an increase in response to our 2020 and 2025 lunar closures, looking 2030 and beyond. So while we are seeing an increase in our spawning abundance, New York legislation did feel that more protections were necessary. And in December of 2025, Governor Kathy Hochul signed the bill that prohibits the take of horseshoe crabs from New York waters, except for scientific or educational purposes, beginning January 1st, 2029. DC is directed to do a phase out of the fishery each year until that 2029 closure date. So this year, the quota is 112,500 crabs, and there will be a 25% reduction each year until that 2029. DC will still manage and monitor horseshoe crabs, including setting our quota management plan annually and also our lunar closures, and will remain in compliance with the fishery management plan for the commission. Currently, DC and CTUC Environmental Association are supporting Cornell Cooperative Extension to conduct laboratory research on whelk behavior to assess the efficiency of alternative baits to horseshoe crab baits. This is really looking at waste stream products and also invasives. Initial results are expected in early 2027, and based on any identified possible baits, and not just baits that actually are just as good as horseshoe crab or better, but also economically viable for our fishermen. So it's important to keep that in mind. So hopefully, we'll be getting results before that 2029 ban takes place. We will continue with our spawning and tagging survey. And findings are expected to be published this year, and hopefully to update with that the mark recapture analysis. Just to finish off, because I know I just said a lot, but it's also important to, besides harvest, to also keep in mind habitat concerns, shoreline hardening, sea level rise, beach replenishment activities can all be affecting the recovery of horseshoe crabs back to those historical levels. Habitat loss is actually identified as the key long-term conservation challenge. I believe that's coastwide, but specifically New York. For example, for the Conic estuary, while it has consistently been like less than 10% of harvest, there's been a 2 to 3-fold increase in bulkheads from 2000 to 2016 in that region. So it does bring a lot of concerns forward with that, that both harvest and habitat need to be managed cooperatively to help sustain the population back to those historic levels. So I know I threw a lot of information at you. I would love to answer questions. This actually video was taken by one of our environmental conservation officers from our drone team for one of our sites at Murch's Bay. So yes, we're always very proud. We're like, yay, drone. So yes, so thank you very much, and I'd love to answer questions.
So we'll start with questions in the room.
Yeah, I missed it on the map, but do you include Pelham Bay in your survey?
Yeah.
When it's kind of the northwest corner of Long Island Sound, where the Bronx and Rochester, New Rochelle and so forth.
Yeah, I think we did historically have some sites there. Like over the years, we've had like some sites come and go, kind of like what Laura said. So yeah, I think at this time we don't exactly have one in that region. You can.
Hi, can you tell me why you only survey at night?
Yes, so our pilot survey back in 2007 actually tested and daytime and nighttime survey, and it was just found that nighttime had just an order of magnitude higher of spawning crabs. Our survey was based on the Delaware Bay survey, so that is kind of why we ended up doing just evening.
I'm a citizen spine surveyor, so I also have a question. You only survey at night. Do you also only survey during the high full moons?
No, yes. So no, we don't. We also do two, like Laura said, we do 2 nights before on the new or full moon, and then 2 nights after. So each site is for that moon cycle is getting about 3 nights per. So I think that equals about 12 sample nights a year.
I've never been down there. It's cool to see the video and the drone footage.
Yes.
Like those numbers, is that representative? Is that like your best site, or is that like representative of where you see what your spawning beaches look like? Because
so yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off. This is actually Murch's Bay Pikes Beach. So this is one of our South Shore sites. So it is one of our the sites that get a lot of abundance of crabs. So I didn't go into specifics with how our spawning surveys run, but the majority of sites is set transect line and a total count. There are several sites, 6 at this time, that do a quadrat subsample method. This being one of the sites because they are getting over 2,000 crabs a night.
Wow, because there's nothing in Massachusetts that looks anything like that. That's 2 orders of magnitude higher than what the vast majority of Massachusetts beaches look like, other than Monomoy. And if you go to Monomoy, you have to go inside the closed areas, but that's what it looks like. But Cape Cod Bay, we're counting 3 crabs in a survey. So it's just interesting to see that.
Each site is definitely varied. I mean, again, this is definitely one of our big South Shore sites. But yeah, all our indices of spawning activity vary. Like some of our peconics, you might be getting 2 crabs a night. Sometimes you get 100. It does depend. There's definitely environmental factors like the way the wind is coming up. But yeah, this is definitely one of our very proud sites, where the majority of this is occurring also.
Right. Well, yeah, it's gonna be where all the crabs are. And then the question for the Massachusetts folks, are we expecting selling bait crabs to New York in 4 years, 5 years? And is that one of the reasons why there was so much pushback against the reduction in the bait quota?
So I can only answer a small part of that. DMF cannot manage interstate commerce. So we can't control where our bait crabs are sold to. And anything beyond that, I would say maybe follow up with like Dan or Jared after the meeting.
Any indication of the prospects for the artificial bait studies? How it's going?
So currently, and this was actually based off a New Hampshire laboratory study that was looking at surf clam bellies and green crabs. So, and which did pretty successful in the laboratory, but maybe not as successful in the field studies. So our collaborators at Cornell Cooperative Extension, Matthew Sclafani, he's actually looking at a laboratory as a split stream to test these different baits, which is a little different than the laboratory study done in New Hampshire. So yeah, I think looking at both those as options, also spider crabs, we're definitely in contact with a lot of our commercial fishermen, seeing what else that they use besides horseshoe crab or like as a mix with horseshoe crab. So at this point, the initial results, like we haven't even really begun yet. The whelk really decided to hibernate this winter, even with warm water into the tanks and stuff. So they haven't been very active. But we are hoping to expect results in 2027.
Let's do one more and then we're going to take breaks.
I was very interested in hearing you at the very end of your presentation talk about habitat.
Mm-hmm.
Massachusetts, by many estimates, is the most developed shoreline in New England, and has been so for hundreds of years. And now we have very little areas that I've come across, especially in Cape Cod Bay, where you can say the habitat hasn't been destroyed or minimized. And I'm not exactly sure of how important that is but I would assume that it's important to the sustainability long term of the species. So could you give any more detail about what you're doing to coordinate with people that would bring about, habitat management or improvement?
So at this time, I don't have any data or anything readily available. Habitat concerns is brought up to a lot of our partners, our Peconic Estuary Partnership. They're aware. They're currently holding horseshoe crab workshops to discuss this issue. And I know that there's our team in Habitat is always like getting concerns and working up for possible efforts for that. But I don't have anything that's being readily available and like currently happening for these concerns, but they are big concerns.
Is Massachusetts working in that area?
That is something that my group does not do. So, our group the team here is very focused on invertebrate fisheries. We have a habitat program. I would say that would be a question either for the habitat folks, for our policymakers, or for the coastal zone management, which is a different agency. Yeah. Yep. All right, folks, let's take a brief break. We are a little behind, but not too bad. So let's come back here. My clock says 10:54. Let's try to meet back at 11. That's okay.
It's a quick break.
Yeah, quick. And I mean, if folks aren't back in the room, we'll give it another minute or so.
This has been very informative.
Good.
It's unbelievable.
Good. Yeah, that's why we do it, so that's good.
Yeah.
Sure.
I need to.
How's that thing work?
That's pretty easy.
Cool. How can I start from the beginning?
Yes.
No, it's fine. Sorry. Great.
Okay, see if I can hurt everybody back in. Yeah. Okay, folks, let's just moving along, if we could, please.
No, I'll get him. You should bring a bell. You should bring a bell when you're the operator. When the intermission ends.
All right, here we go. So our next speaker is Liana D'Annunzio. She is a shorebird biologist for Manomet Conservation Sciences. Her work focuses on improving our understanding of how shorebirds use the Massachusetts coast during migration in order to guide conservation efforts. She's currently researching the migration ecology of ruddy turnstones and whimbrel while they are stopped over on Cape Cod. She also leads a statewide shorebird migration survey, the Massachusetts Shorebird List. It's harder to say that. She holds a master's degree in environmental science and management from the University of Rhode Island. So thank you so much, Liana, for coming, and take it away.
So thank you so much to DMF for holding this awesome event and for inviting me to speak. But yeah, as mentioned, my name is Liana D'Annunzio, and I'm a shorebird biologist for Manomet Conservation Sciences. And today I'll be telling you about some of our research that's investigating the connection between shorebirds and horseshoe crabs on Cape Cod. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Manomet, we're a nonprofit research and conservation organization based in Plymouth, Massachusetts, but we have staff working throughout the Western Hemisphere on things like coastal resiliency, education, and shorebird recovery. So I'm going to begin with a brief background on shorebirds, just so we're all on the same page. When I say shorebirds, I'm talking about sandpipers, plovers, oyster catchers, and the like. Other coastal water birds like gulls or terns are not included in this group, so just a heads up. So I'd like to start by just emphasizing the need for shorebird conservation. So this graph comes from the 2025 State of the Birds report, and it shows the average percent change in population of different groups of birds since 1970. And you can see that shorebirds have declined an average of 33% during this period of time. And they're more imperiled than all but two other groups of birds. And there's a lot of factors that have been contributing to these shorebird population declines, things like habitat loss and degradation due to development, climate change impacts, and pollution. And changes to habitat can, of course, impact food resources available to those birds at those sites. And shorebirds are also negatively impacted by a variety of human activities, anything from recreational activities on beaches to large-scale industrial activities. And of course, they also face predation, but not just from wild animals, but also domestic animals and even humans. So shorebird market hunting was once prevalent on Cape Cod back in the 1800s and early 1900s. It's now illegal, but shorebird hunting does still occur in some places in the Caribbean and South America.
Yeah.
And I did want to point out that these population declines are even worse for the long distance migratory shorebird species. They've declined an average of 52% since 1970. And the reason for this is likely because of their very challenging lifestyles and the variety of threats that they face at each site that they visit throughout their annual cycle. And I'd like to illustrate this by sharing an example of a long distance migratory shorebird's life cycle. I'm going to use the red knot as an example. If you're not familiar with the red knot, they are a robin-sized sandpiper, have a nice rusty colored breast, and they are federally and state threatened. They used to be found in Massachusetts in the thousands, and today they're pretty scarce. You can pretty much only see them in a couple of pockets regularly on the Outer Cape, with much smaller block numbers, usually mid to low hundreds if you're lucky, and that's kind of only at Monomoy, but I'll get to that more later. So anyway, so red knots begin their lives on their Arctic breeding grounds in the early summer. So you can see that highlighted in the pinkish color at the top of the map. As soon as the young are self-sufficient, the adults will begin to head south for the winter. And this leaves the young behind to continue working on their feathers and building up their fat reserves before they too will head off to begin their very first migrations ever without parental guidance. So throughout the fall, these birds will head south to their wintering or non-breeding grounds. These are highlighted in blue on the map. And that can be anywhere from southern US all the way to the very southern tip of South America in Tierra del Fuego, Chile. So that means that some of these birds are flying about 9,000 miles south. And then they repeat this journey in the spring to head back north to their breeding grounds. So that means some of these birds are flying about 18,000 miles a year, which is just incredible. But these birds can only fly about a couple thousand miles nonstop on fat reserves alone before they have to stop to rest and refuel. And the places that they do that at are known as stopovers or staging areas. So these sites are absolutely crucial for these birds to be able to survive these long migrations. And some key features of quality staging areas includes plenty of food for the birds to refuel on. More birds primarily eat invertebrates, sometimes a little bit of other food types. And they also need some safe places to rest. And over 25 species of shorebirds use staging areas on Cape Cod and other places in coastal Massachusetts during both spring and fall migration. So because these long distance migratory shorebirds spread their lives out through the entire hemisphere, every site that they visit is really important for their overall survival and their breeding success. So when we're thinking about conservation planning for these long distance migrants, it's really important that we understand what their needs are at each site and also what threats they face at each site. So then we can make sure to find ways to address any issues so we can better support them throughout their full annual cycle. And Manamit has been doing just that with our partners throughout the Western Hemisphere. And our overall goal is to reverse these shorebird population declines. And in just a bit, I'll tell you about how we're doing that on Cape Cod. But first, I'm going to talk about horseshoe crabs a little bit since that's why we're all here. I'll begin with a brief overview of the shorebird horseshoe crab connection. So spring shorebird migration and peak horseshoe crab spawning season coincide at sites along the Atlantic coast of the US. And some shorebird populations really depend on the abundance of horseshoe crab eggs, as you can see in that photo, to help them refuel for migration so they can successfully make it north and have a successful breeding season. And the place that's probably best known for this horseshoe crab shorebird connection is Delaware Bay. And because of that, a whole lot of research has gone on in Delaware Bay to better understand the shorebird horseshoe crab connection. And their research has been able to link the decline in shorebird populations that stage in Delaware Bay to the decrease in horseshoe crab eggs that was a result of horseshoe crab overharvest. And thanks to all the research and conservation efforts in Delaware Bay, now they take shorebird needs, especially the needs of the federally threatened red knot, into consideration when they're setting horseshoe crab regulations and quotas. harvest quotas. However, less is known about this horseshoe crab shorebird connection and other places where shorebird migration and horseshoe crab spawning overlap, such as in Massachusetts. However, over the years, there have been plenty of observations of shorebirds eating horseshoe crabs and evidence of them using horseshoe crab eggs during both spring and fall migration. And I just have a couple of examples here in photos. So this first photo, you can see a Hudsonian godwit with a horseshoe crab egg in its bill. This is at Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge during fall migration. We also often see a shorebird called the ruddy turnstone digging up horseshoe crab nests to eat the eggs and even the larval stage horseshoe crabs. You can see a photo of an excavated horseshoe crab nest in that far picture. And even the state and federally threatened piping plover has been known to partake in the horseshoe crab egg feast. So thank you to Mark Verity for sharing this photo of a piping plover eating horseshoe crab eggs at Nauset Spit during spring migration. There has been previous research that occurred at Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge in the mid-2000s during fall migration that actually found horseshoe crab eggs in the stomach contents of several shorebird species as well. So yes, shorebirds do eat horseshoe crab eggs in Massachusetts, especially on Cape Cod, but we don't fully understand how much they're relying on this as a food resource as opposed to other types of invertebrate prey. So over the past few years, Management has been working closely with our partners to help fill some of these information gaps to better understand the horseshoe crab shorebird relationship. And next, I'll be sharing with you a couple of studies that we're performing. I did want to just state that some of these studies are ongoing, so a lot of the results I'm going to be sharing are preliminary, so just keep that in mind. The first study I'm going to share with you focuses on spring migration, and this is actually part of a much larger study looking at spring shorebird migration in New England. And we're partnering on this with people from University of Rhode Island, especially Rebecca Linhart, who was like the lead for this research, and Mass Audubon, US Fish and Wildlife Service, and USGS. So our Cape Cod objectives for this research include better understanding spring shorebird migration routes, so we can see how Cape Cod fits into that larger annual cycle. We also want to understand what food is available to shorebirds at Cape Cod staging areas, and also what the shorebirds are actually eating when they're staging here to help them refuel for their migrations, and in particular, how much they're relying on horseshoe crab eggs. So I'm going to start by introducing you to our study site. We've already heard a lot about it today, Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge, just off the elbow of the Cape in Chatham. It's a series of barrier islands with really extensive mudflats, beaches, and salt marshes. And the site's managed by the US Fish and Wildlife Service. And I did want to give a big thank you to the Monomoy staff for helping us to get this research off the ground, but also for being stewards of this really important site. So Monomoy is the premier shorebird staging area in Massachusetts, and it's also part of the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. And it can support upwards of 100,000 shorebirds every year. So really important site for shorebirds. And as was mentioned earlier, it also serves as a horseshoe crab spawning refuge because all horseshoe crab harvest has been banned there since 2002. And likely because of this, it's also a horseshoe crab spawning hotspot. So you can see this photo. This comes from an aerial survey that we conducted in partnership with Lighthawk back in 2024. And just on these two small sandbars, there's over 3,000 horseshoe crabs spawning, which is just incredible. And throughout the survey, we saw plenty more of this scene throughout the refuge boundaries. And that was actually a stark contrast to what we saw along the rest of the Cape Cod and South Shore coast that we surveyed, where there were largely no crabs detected. The only other place where we detected horseshoe crabs was in the Nauset area, which, as mentioned earlier, does have some additional horseshoe crab harvest restrictions. Only biomedical harvest is allowed there. So this just goes to show how important Monomoy is to both shorebirds and horseshoe crabs, which is why we chose it as our study site. Now I'm going to introduce you to our focal shorebird species, the reddy turnstone, red knots, dunlin, and sanderling. These are all small to medium-sized shorebirds. They undergo medium to long distance migrations, and they've all experienced population decline over the past few decades. So I'm going to start by sharing with you some of our preliminary shorebird tracking results. So this map here shows the northbound migration of 4 reddy turnstones that we put tracking devices on last spring. There's a photo of a reddy turnstone with the tracking, a satellite tag they're called, on its back. And each color line is a different bird. So you can see where they all begin on Cape Cod. That's where we put the tags on them. And unfortunately, we do not know where they came from. Like the red knot, they could have wintered as far south as South America. But we do know that by the time they make it to Monomoy, they're already partway through their northbound migrations. So after they were done fattening up at Monomoy, they all headed north to their Arctic breeding grounds, circled in yellow. And this trip was an average of 2,600 miles. And it took the birds anywhere from 5 to 19 days to complete this trip. So the bird that only took 5 days only needed to stop once during this trip. The other birds needed to stop 3 or 4 times to refuel during this trip. And it's very likely that the bird's ability to effectively refuel at Monomoy has an impact on how efficiently they can complete their northbound migration. And it could also impact what their body condition is like once they make it to the breeding grounds. And that's exactly why we want to better understand what food resources are available at Monomoy to help them refuel. So we're doing this in a couple of different ways. We're doing some broad invertebrate sampling to get a better idea of the full invertebrate community and also the biomass of food that's available to the birds. We are still waiting on the results from our invertebrate sampling. And we're also conducting horseshoe crab egg density surveys to better understand how many horseshoe crab eggs are available to the shorebirds. So a little bit more about the egg density surveys. We're using a protocol that was developed in the Delaware Bay. And it's looking at 2 different metrics. The first is surface eggs. These are the individual eggs present in the top 5 centimeters of the sand. And this is what's considered available to the shorebirds to eat because that's about as far down as they can dig or probe their bills. And we also want to get an idea of the overall nesting density. So when a female horseshoe crab lays her egg, she can dig as far down as 20 centimeters and she'll deposit a dense cluster of about 3,000 to 4,000 eggs, like you can see in that photo there. Call them egg clusters. So for the protocol for that is digging holes down to 20 centimeters and counting all the horseshoe crab egg clusters that we find. And I do have some preliminary egg density results from our first 2 years of sampling. So these graphs show the average density of surface eggs, so surface eggs per square meter throughout the 2024 and 2025 sampling seasons. And the sampling season is May through mid to late June. And you can see that the surface egg density does change throughout the season. Peak surface eggs are anywhere between May 25th to June 1st. Our peak density was over 6,000 eggs per square meter, and the annual average was a little over 2,700 eggs per square meter. So we are really excited and lucky that we have some egg density data from the early 2000s. This was collected during a different study conducted by MJ James Peary. So in 2001 and 2002, they did surface egg density surveys at several sites on Cape Cod, but also at Monomoy. And for Monomoy, their average surface eggs per square meter was 540. So that is quite a bit lower than what we've seen in the past 2 years. And there's a number of reasons why that might be. The protocol they used was a little different. They also surveyed past the peak spawning season in July, so that could all impact numbers. But it could also represent that the horseshoe crab population was probably a very low state during that time due to all the unregulated harvest during the 90s. And this was also before any horseshoe crab harvest regulations were really set, especially the full harvest ban at Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge. So we look forward to digging deeper into that comparison. That early study did not look at number of egg clusters, so we're kind of just building out that baseline right now. So for the past 2 years, we have an average egg cluster per meter square of 38.5. So we look forward to continuing to build this long-term data set so we can detect changes in horseshoe crab egg density over time. We can also compare egg density to shorebird numbers throughout the season. The peak eggs, the timing that we're getting peak eggs is usually the timing when we're getting peak shorebird numbers too. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any correlations there. And we can also compare our egg densities to those at other sites using the same protocol, like in Delaware Bay. For example, I think between 2015 and 2021, the New Jersey beaches in Delaware Bay had an average surface egg density of like 10,000 eggs per square meter. So quite a bit more than we're seeing at Monomoy, but it'll be interesting to get more into that comparison as well. And we do have a University of Rhode Island student working on a preliminary analysis right now. So look forward to that. All right, final component to this spring study is that we also want to know what the birds are actually eating to help them refuel for northbound migration. So how we do this is when we catch the birds, put the tracking devices on them, we also take small blood samples, and those can be used in what's called a stable isotope analysis. And that will basically just tell us what invertebrates they've been eating. And we are still waiting on those results as well, but once we do have all of our results, we'll be able to compare the shorebird diet to what food is available, and that can help us figure out if the birds are selecting for specific types of food, and also if food availability is a limiting resource at this site. So results coming soon. We have one more field season at least for this, so probably in the next couple of years, we'll be coming out with some more fleshed out results. But now we'll move on to some of our research that's going on during fall shorebird migration. So this study focused specifically on the red knot, and our study sites were Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge, as well as some other staging sites throughout Pleasant Bay, which is just north of Monomoy. And similar to the last study, we're trying to figure out what food's available to the birds while they're staging there, as well as figuring out what the birds are actually eating. The only differences are that, of course, this is focusing on fall migration when they're heading south for the winter. And we also used some different methods. The methods for this study require much less digging in the sand, and it does not require us to catch any shorebirds. It involves just 3 easy steps. So we go out to the study sites and we collect very small sediment samples from the mudflats that the red knots feed on. That helps us to determine what food is available to the birds. Then we collect fecal samples from red knots feeding at the site. That will help us determine what the red knot's diet is. And finally, we send all those samples off to the environmental DNA lab at the University of Maine, where our partners use DNA metabarcoding techniques to identify the DNA of all the invertebrates present in the samples. So it's a lot more complicated than that, but I won't get into it. And we do have some results to share. We are still working through the full analysis and preparing this for publication, but I do have some exciting stats to show you right now. So this plot shows the relative abundance of DNA from all the different invertebrate groups for all the sediment samples combined. So this is what food is present at the site. So sediment samples were dominated by polychaete worms, a type of marine worm, arthropods like isopods and copepods, and mollusks, primarily gem clams. Okay, so now for the fecal sample. So this is what the red knots were eating. And once again, this is the relative abundance of DNA for different groups of invertebrates for all fecal samples combined. So fecal samples were dominated by arthropods in the orange. That includes horseshoe crabs. So this could be their eggs or their larvae, because this is much later in the season when some of the eggs have probably already hatched. Some crustaceans like sand shrimp and green crabs, isopods as well. mollusks, amphibians, gem clams, and hydrovia marsh snails, and worms. These worms are more closely related to earthworms than the polychaete worms that dominated the sediment samples. So some of our preliminary takeaways that we're able to share right now is that we did notice that some invertebrate DNA was more prevalent in the fecal samples than they were in the sediment samples, and vice versa. So this suggests that the red knots are selecting specific foods. And one example of this is that there was more horseshoe crab DNA present in the fecal samples than there were in the sediment samples. And this was most obvious within our Monomoy samples, which makes sense because that's, the horseshoe crab spawning hotspot. And I will note that we also saw the most red knots at Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge during the sampling period. I think there was a peak of 660 red knots in one day during that sampling period. Now there are some limitations to this, these results. They are showing kind of the frequency of DNA of the different invertebrates in the samples, and they can't really give us like the biomass of the invertebrates. So we can't, precisely say how much horseshoe crab they're eating compared to other invertebrates, but it does provide some really clear quantitative evidence that red knots are using horseshoe crabs as a food resource well into the fall migration, even as late as November. So we're really excited about those results. And like I said, we're wrapping up the full analyses and getting this ready for publication. So look out for a publication in a year or so. And just to wrap things up, once we do have all the full results from both of these studies, we'll be able to apply what we learned to help guide shorebird conservation in Cape Cod and beyond. And I did want to point out some conservation actions that we can do in Cape Cod and other places in coastal Massachusetts that can better support our migratory shorebird species. So one is supporting healthy food supplies to help them refuel during migration. And an example of how we could do this is taking the shorebird needs into account when setting, say, like horseshoe crab harvest regulations and quotas, like they do in Delaware Bay. And I will note that 2024 peak spawning harvest ban was definitely a win for the shorebirds. Getting just more food into the environment is, only going to help them. So that was really great to see. Something else we could do is reduce disturbance at staging sites. This is in coastal Massachusetts is primarily recreational beach activities. So we do like to tell beach goers that they can help out with that by if they see a flock of shorebirds on the beach, just make sure to give them a lot of space so they can focus on resting and refueling so they can kind of continue their migrations and make it to the next breeding season. We like to use the slogan, walk around the flock, to help folks remember that. And finally, we can support habitat restoration, habitats like beach, mudflats, and salt marshes. Restoring these habitats not only helps the shorebirds and the horseshoe crabs, but also a variety of other coastal wildlife and the people who love and depend on these ecosystems as well. So that's about all I have. I did put a little QR code if you're interested in learning more about shorebird migration in Massachusetts. I'll bring you to a site that talks about our Massachusetts shorebird blitz. So feel free to check that out. And I think I have time for questions. Okay.
So Liana, can you go back to your slide of the egg density?
Mm-hmm.
Or, I wonder, I don't think I really understand what the chart is saying there, in that not so many eggs in June, peak eggs in May. Is that, but why is that? And what about your sampling that have the horseshoe crab eggs hatched that were laid first, or what? So what does that chart say?
Yeah, so we haven't done the full analysis of this yet. This is just kind of the raw data, but obviously there's less eggs in the beginning of the season, and we saw the peaks during late May, early June. So I know that this is just for the surface eggs in that top 5 centimeters. So there's, I think, a variety of things that can impact how many eggs are on the surface. They could get, washed away. They could get eaten by things. So past the peak spawning season, things like that, environmental factors can contribute to a lower egg density, but we haven't fully analyzed this data, so we can definitely put in some environmental factors to help see if that impacts the density.
Thank
I'll go where the microphone's going.
Great, thank you. It's very interesting. I was surprised to see horseshoe crab eggs available in the fall. I was kind of, I think, marinating all summer in the sand.
Yes.
Any idea what the origin is?
Yeah, so they I'm not a horseshoe crab biologist, but they are certainly there, and we have seen like them eating the larval horseshoe crabs as well. But I've heard that horseshoe crab spawning can go later than June. Maybe Derek has a more specific end date for spawning, but they can be in the sand for a few weeks, definitely, though, they develop.
Well, more than that, the literature shows that they can stay as eggs well past the normal hatching. I think
You've heard of overwintering?
Yeah, so there is a study that was done in Delaware Bay region where they do overwinter for the year. They can't.
Yeah.
They don't know what portion of them do, but there is possible they can do that. It hasn't been done up here, so we don't know the true numbers up here, but it has been shown in Delaware Bay that can winter over as eggs and hatch the next year.
Very good.
I actually have one question too.
Oh, yeah.
So in Delaware Bay, the population of horseshoe crabs has quadrupled in the last 15 years. Has there been any response with the red knot population?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I thought I had maybe a note of that. I'll get back to you, but we can go. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Leanna. Good presentation, a great presentation. Quick, just clarification on your results of DNA results. When you say horseshoe crab DNA, that's exactly what it is. You don't know if it's larval, egg, or whatever. It could be either or.
Yes, that's what, one of the limitations. We don't know if it's egg or sorry.
Question, might unfertilized horseshoe crab eggs just remain in the sediment and not result in an emerging viable horseshoe crab? Like, could that be why, as was mentioned, the eggs can stay longer than expected?
And the surface layer?
Yeah.
I believe those ones, the eggs in that top 5 centimeters, those are typically the ones that get kicked up while the crabs are spawning. So they might like go and spawn over another crab's nest and kick up some of the eggs, and they end up in that top centimeter. I'm not sure what the survival rate of those ones are, but those are usually the ones to get picked up by the birds and probably other animals too.
Hi, in a long-term aquaculture program we have at the Cape Cod Museum of Natural History, we've seen this overwintering phenomenon happen as far as 3 or 6 months after the initial harvest.
Thank you, Morgan.
Let's do one on.
Okay.
Sorry.
We did have one online. It's kind of answered, but I'll just let you answer as well. Does that blood analysis or diet give you just presence absence, or is there a way to direct relative concentrations in the blood to get a sense of actual preference of food items? And that's from Chris Dodge.
Okay, I'm not the one actually doing that analysis. Our partners at University of Rhode Island are doing that. So I'll probably have to also get back to you on that one. Sorry about that. We are also looking at using the blood to look at fattening rates of the birds too at the sites to see, how great of a site it is for refueling. So that's just another metric we're looking at as well, just to mention that.
I have a question, might be silly.
Oh, yeah.
Probably can hear me because I'm standing up here, but so this might be a silly question, but for the fecal samples, like, how are you making sure that the fecal samples came from the species that you think it did?
Yeah, good question. We do kind of go out and, find a flock or even an individual red knot, and we will just watch them.
Okay.
Sometimes it's one bird and it's getting a little nervous because they're watching. But if it's like a pure flock of red knots, it's pretty easy to just go over there and collect the sample. If it's a mixed flock, that would definitely be a little different. We would have to pay more close attention. We also do this, as the tide is falling. A lot of the previous low tide cycle, poop has already been washed away. So the tide helps with flushing, and we are just really careful that we're watching the birds and making sure they come from there. The DNA lab is also able to detect the red knot DNA and the samples as well. So we made sure they did a screening of all the fecal samples to make sure they were indeed red knots.
Great. Yep, we have one more. Anybody got one more?
I have a horseshoe. Okay, go ahead.
I was just wondering if your transmitters on the bird you were tracking, if they stay active long enough to see them on the return trip.
That's a great question. So we're using some satellite transmitters, and they're solar powered, so they could, potentially last a fairly long time. However, with the birds that we're putting them on, but the ruddy turnstones, their body shape and how they put on fat and lose fat impacts how we attach the tag. So we actually just glue the tags to their backs, because if we were to put like a harness on them, that would really negatively probably impact them, because they have to gain a lot of fat and then lose it again as they're flying. So that could have some impacts to them. So we glue the tags on, and that unfortunately reduces the length of time that they stay on the birds. When the bird molts its feathers, that tag will just come off. So for all the birds, we got their full breeding seasons, and we did get a partial southbound migration for one of our birds. And we actually have, as part of a different study, have some folks in Delaware Bay also putting the same tags on ruddy turnstones, and they've had some get all the way to the non-breeding grounds on the north coast of South America. So that was pretty cool. So it depends on the tag and the attachment method on how long it lasts. But for our birds, primarily just northbound migration and breeding season.
One more.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, when they migrate, when like the red knot migrates, how long do they stay aloft? Is it multiple days, or do they rest every day?
Yeah, it could be a few days in flight. And unlike some other species of birds, shorebirds, they can't really soar like a hawk or something, and they can't stop over the ocean and float on the water like, say, a tern might be able to do. They just have to flap the whole way, which makes it even more impressive that they're just flapping that entire time, like, a couple thousand miles for a couple days straight. So that's why it's really important that they have all the fat reserves they need to make those big water crossings.
All right, cool. Okay, all right, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Gonna bring Derek back up to wrap it up, and then it will be lunch time, for which we are not providing you food, sorry. Don't want that to sound like a lunch to you.
All right, so meeting wrap up. So a couple things I just wanted to go over. Forecast for DMF as far as what we're doing this coming year. We're going to be continuing our monitoring efforts. That's fisheries independent surveys. So the spawning survey, the trawl survey, and the singing survey. We're continuing our fisheries dependent monitoring. So going out in the boats and collecting samples while they're out there just collecting biomedical crabs. Doing all that same stuff that we've been doing in the past. This year we're coming out with a biomedical tech report. So we've been doing all the sampling. You saw summaries of some of that work there. We're doing a much more comprehensive look at that, and we'll be publishing that later this year. We're doing 2 acoustic telemetry studies. Both of those are to inform the stock assessment. So one is looking at short-term biomedical mortality. We'll be out in Pleasant Bay tagging horseshoe crabs that have been bled by ACC. They're going to be released. We'll put tags on them, see how they do. The other part is discard mortality. In the last 2 stock assessments in 2019 and 2024, there were 2 different estimates of discard mortality that were used in the assessment. The 2019 is 50%, meaning 50% of the crabs they thought died when they were released, which seems extremely high to me. The second one in 2024 used a different estimate of 5%. So those are very varying estimates. Neither one's really based on data or based on guesses. So we're trying to put some data behind that to actually get a decent estimate of mortality. We're also doing more conventional tagging. We did some last year. We're actually improving upon that this year, doing more. So look at long-term survival rates of biomedical crabs. There was a study done by Dave Smith a few years ago. We're basically doing the same thing. Looking at long-term survival rates of those crabs. And also, just tag for survival estimates. It's one of the things that was requested in the last stock assessment. So do more tag in this area. There's been a decrease in our tags in this area the last several years. And as I mentioned before, we have 4 team of staff working on horseshoe crabs this year. Their primary goal is to work with horseshoe crabs, on purpose. So a lot of effort on horseshoe crabs here.
Hey, Derek?
Yep.
Before you go on, could you elaborate how acoustic tagging allows you to monitor the fate of a horseshoe crab over time in case it's not clear to everybody?
Okay, so the first study we're doing in Pleasant Bay, we're gonna have an acoustic array. So it's a fine scale array very close together, so we can triangulate where the crabs go. We're gonna be tagging some crabs that are dead, so we can get a signature from those dead crabs and see how they move in the water, in case it's gonna be just moving the tide. And then from that, we can get an assessment of how many crabs that we released that were bled, lived or died. Plus, there's gonna be an array, there's gonna be other receivers all around Pleasant Bay, so we can see if they moved to other spots. And also doing the same thing in Nantucket Sound, for the discard study, we're gonna have a fine scale acoustic array, dropping the crabs in those spots to see if they live or die. But also there's a ton of acoustic receivers already out there from DMF doing shark research or other research, as well as the New England aquariums. There's a ton of receivers out there that can pick up crabs all over the place.
Derek, how do you know they're dead?
You have to look at the signature. So you're gonna see a signature from the crabs when they're moving in that array. So basically we're gonna tag some that are dead, and we'll get a signature from those crabs. You'll just see them move a little bit, not too much, but we're gonna compare those.
Yeah.
Well, it'll move a little bit from the tide and stuff, but yes, correct. Yeah.
Eric.
Yep.
One more question, just can you, elaborate, what exactly, how would you define discard mortality? Discards from,
So on the draggers, they're catching crabs. They retain some. Those are the ones that are gonna be landed. They discard other ones that are either too small, recently molted, bleeding, whatever else. Those crabs get let go immediately. So the last 2 assessments have 2 different methods of mortality, or 2 different estimates of mortality, 50% and 5. Those are very varying rates. We're trying to get some data to put behind that. But it's not just the biomedical fleet or fishers targeting horseshoe crabs. It's other fleets as well, guys targeting fluke or anything else. They're still discarding some crabs. So we're looking at that estimate. All right, so one of the takeaways I want you guys to get is the status of horseshoe crabs. Like my job in a nutshell is to provide scientific information about the status of the resource and impacts from the fishery. So a lot of things I see in the media are like this from NPR in 2024. Horseshoe crabs spawn under new Massachusetts regulations. And the first line from that article is horseshoe crabs are not in danger or threatened in Massachusetts, but their numbers are at historic lows. You guys saw the data today. There's no information that says they're at historic lows based on the data. So that's one of the most frustrating parts of my job is seeing stuff like this. According to scientists from SDMF and other spots, survey abundance between time series is between time series highs and norms. Some of our surveys go back 40 years, which provide a lot of context. The last 2 stock assessments by ASMC says horseshoe crab abundance in the state is increasing, as well as increasing generally coastwide. These are approved by every single state and federal horseshoe crab biologist on the East Coast. So if you're not listening to every single state and federal horseshoe crab biologist on the East Coast, who are you listening to? The IUCN also saying the same thing. It's increasing in the Northeast region from Connecticut to Massachusetts, and also generally increasing coastwide. NOAA is also saying the same thing. Based on the ESA report that they put out recently, trends coastwide are generally increasing. So that's the main takeaway I want you guys to get from this is that horseshoe crabs are increasing in this area in the state. How you value them is up to you. But the point I really want to make is they're increasing in this area.
Did you get back to NPR and try to correct that?
They were contacted by Dan and
Okay.
never responded.
They never
They
responded.
never responded.
That's too bad.
So. Right. There's more information here if you want to talk to any of the speakers or email them. All the information is right here. And that's what we have for today. So if you guys have any wrap questions, we'll take them, but that's about.
This will be on our YouTube.
Yeah, so last year
channel?
we posted on our YouTube page, so it should be there. But if anyone wants the slides or anything else, they're all publicly available. Just let me know, send me an email. I think you all have my email and it's right there anyway.
Thanks, Derek.
We can take time if you want for 1 or 2 more questions before we leave for the day.
You guys good? You had enough? Oh.
Just a quick statement. When I talk to the press, I mean, obviously I know more than the average person. I'm supplying half of the spawning data personally, right?
Yep.
I'm very careful to break it down by embayment because it's nuanced. It doesn't make sense to talk about Massachusetts horseshoe crab population.
Agreed.
Because you look at the difference between Monomoy, what we saw there, and Cape Cod
So that,
Bay.
they're different populations, north and south Cape Cod.
And that's why we used to argue for embayment specific, like we should have different regs for Cape Cod Bay, you know, it never happened.
It basically is now,
Yeah.
though. That's basically what we have now because of closure for the
Yeah,
spawning season.
Right, we finally got there. And so I'm hopeful for the Bay going forward, though there seem to be other issues